Yes, yes, and yes. Welcome, amazing humans. I am absolutely thrilled that not only do we have electricity but working internet, and here we are. Albeit on a Monday, but still bringing you good old story time. This is episode 22. Can you believe it? And all I can say is just strap yourselves in. It's going to be a wild ride. I'm going to try to keep it as concise as possible this evening. Unfortunately, last time I was a little bit rushed, and so there was a lot of information crammed into the previous story time, and we're going to try to take it a little bit more slowly, but at the same time, try and unpack things a little bit more precisely. Because I think it's time in episode 22 of Storytime that we cast our minds back, have a good look at all that's been happening around the whole UAP phenomena and disclosure. And if you've joined us for the first time, welcome to Storytime. I just want to let you know that this is not the only topic that we tend to touch on. So that's why I say strap yourselves in. My personal favorite subject is metaphysics and more broadly speaking, philosophy. And my training is in international relations and politics and stuff like that. But we touch on everything here, from consciousness to maths, physics, CIA, intelligence, cover-ups, a little bit of conspiracy here and there, of course, you know. Basically, though, if you've never joined us for story time, what we try and do is take this place we find ourselves in history, 2023, and we try and look at it through the lens of the things that have brought us here. And by tracking this history, when you begin to scratch a little bit beneath the surface, you realize that it's not as clear-cut as we often like to think. And the moment you gaze your discerned eye upon many things, suddenly little dots and links begin to form, and patterns begin to emerge. And the rabbit hole gets a little bit deeper each time. So that's my job. I'm your host, Friendly Euphoria, joining you from Johannesburg, South Africa. Mama Africa. So proud to be able to beam to you this information from the southern tip of the earth, as it were, for the moment. It's not the furthest south you can be, but I mean, for most of the general audience, let's just say, a lot of you guys are closer to the equator and up north, is what I'm saying. And so, yeah, just hosting from such a wonderful continent with information that tries to bring us together is the aim of this little project of mine. We try to have a little bit of fun at the same time as bring a few facts. And of course, it's called story time. So these facts are just what I know as just a human being walking around from day to day, doing my thing. I'm not an expert, so I'll mix up names and dates and things, and don't hold me to account. Be a skeptical and reasonable free thinker. Use your own rationale to come to your own conclusions. My job is just to show you the various rabbit holes that we can tumble down, and in some way try and guide you through it. The aim of Storytime in this essence is to really just have a fat party with the mysteries that we are sharing as a collective, you know? It's not just story, because, you know, stories can be fictional and non-fictional, and sometimes a little bit of a mix in between. But the most important thing is that dialectic, that sharing, because just one person speaking is not really a story. It's when experience is shared that you really have not only a conversation and a dialectic, but a narrative. And that's what I hope to share with you this evening. So, as your host, Euphoria, I'm going to try and this evening bring to you quite a lot of very deep topics, but they all come under two main points. Number one is the whole UAP disclosure situation. And number two is continuation of government. Now, the American military refers to it as continuity of government, And these two things, in my opinion, have formed this beautiful love child called the threat op. And we'll look into what is this threat op, which tries to outline basically this concept that the military and the intelligence community are now, they just suddenly had a great change of heart and they just want to tell us the truth and save us from ourselves and the aliens. That's where we're at. But we're going to be a little bit wiser to this. As I say, although I might mix things up and make a few errors here and there, and we're just having good fun talking about these things, I don't go too far off of the, let's call it, conspiratorial deep end. There's always a grain of truth that I bring to you, and I hope that that's what differentiates this channel from any other. And I don't mind being corrected. I don't mind changing my mind about things, and that's why I say it's an open dialogue. But at the same time, it's always my great pleasure to try and put forward things that I think are important and that most people don't have the time to delve deeply into. And this whole topic or subject comes front and center with the whole UAP disclosure phenomena that we've been having recently. If you have been living under a rock, which I'm sure most of you have not, but just to get us started, basically, the question of are we alone in the universe has been as old as time. We have asked this question since we were able to ask this question, which was probably pre-Homo sapiens sapien. Now, with technology and the way our civilization has finally come forward, the information-rich environment that we live in, with the internet and the sharing of telecommunications and just general technology embedded in just almost every facet of our lives, what we have is a different type of civilization that our forefathers perhaps have not seen before, at least the ones that we know of, let's just say. So prehistoric man did not have satellites in space and quantum, CERN collider things, nothing of that huge nature. But we, on the other hand, are growing up with the internet and Neuralink and concepts of colonizing Mars as, just another day on Twitter. And it goes deeper than that. But the point of this is that in this information-rich environment, not only are we unfortunately subject to the forces that can learn to control these information channels, because information is what essentially informs our perception. If you can control the information, you can control the perception. We've been through this in terms of CIA mind control and MK Ultra, and many other episodes of StoryTime have looked into why the military has such a fond interest in how your mind works and how it can be controlled through drugs and electromagnetic waves and whatever other technology, speechcraft, neural linguistic programming, everything from the legal to the illegal. That's the CIA for you, among some other nefarious intelligence agencies, not just in America but across the world. Now, I want to try and square this with the whole UAP disclosure and secrecy and UFO technology and all of this. I know I'm making a big jump here, but what I'm essentially trying to say is that the whole concept of secrecy is in the hands of the intelligence services like the CIA and such. So what we have with this disclosure business is the CIA group of people or other intelligence officials and military and government officials that are kind of in cahoots are coming forward and giving us this amazing tale of technology and um, alien beings and things like that. So in this information rich environment where every day there's something new, and we're seeing more and more of a quickening of all kinds of social unfoldings and revelations, and I mean, just again, everything from political scandal in the Durham reports, to, you know, um, disclosure through aggression, others in the Greer camp, and other very highly ranked key witnesses, not only from the US but all over the place, just constantly coming forward and saying the answer to the question of are we alone in the universe is we are definitely not alone. And with this phenomena comes all these interesting things. And when I say interesting things, basically it's and the phenomenon is really the best term and a good way of thinking about it, because it's a really broad range of things that we're not able to always explain and understand. These experiences have been with us since pre-biblical times, whether you're talking about Ezekiel and the wheel, or Enoch being taken up and away to, you know, the place to measure the great temple and meet the leaders, and it has, from any end of the earth. I mean, even again in India with the Vimanas, and other tales of craft in almost every culture, there is a phenomena that we don't quite understand. Now, when we didn't understand something in nature, you know, let's say you come across a new animal, you're an explorer, you come across a new land, you see an animal. The most immediate thing is, of course, as an explorer, the pursuit of knowledge. You may come across an animal that is extremely aggressive and carnivorous, and I guess explorers will learn that very quickly and then keep a distance and take an understanding approach to the nature of the animal. And if it's, of course, more docile, then, you know, you can get closer, and at a great extreme, some animals can even be domesticated. But we don't, if you're the military though, you don't see it this way. Everything to you is a threat, and everything to you is something that, if it doesn't heed to your command, must be forced. And that means, at its most extreme form, forced in a deadly manner. Like that is what warfare is, basically. And so, wrapped in all of this is us in this information-rich environment, this phenomena that we wish to understand, and it's broader in its scope than just a couple of orbs in the sky or whatever we picking up on radar, or whatever the experiences that we might have on, you know, whatever accounts, first or second hand, or whatever nature, you know, the contact of the third, fourth, fifth kind. All of these things are important bits of information that humanity need to try and put the story together. But if you're the military, again, all of this gets shrouded in secrecy. Now, if you don't know where the secrecy comes from, try think of, let's say, the Manhattan Project, the attempt to make the first atomic weapon. Now, in Nevada, there were thousands of people working on these projects, and many of them, being compartmentalized, didn't have a clue what they were eventually putting together, except a select core of people that needed to know, just to sort of keep the program together. And what I'm trying to just highlight here is the secrecy. All of this technology is hidden by secret components and mechanisms of the war machine and the government, because that's what gives them the edge and keeps that information away from their adversaries. And so, as I mentioned, everything that is useful is secret until it's needed for warfare. They often try and use their secret tactics as little as possible in warfare, because as you use it, you give feedback to the enemy. It's kind of like firing a brand new missile. If you fire it, you can immediately know that many countries will be analyzing how it performs and satellite imaging of it, and it will be measured and weighed. And so, as an intelligence component of the military, you want to keep your deepest technology secret for the right moment, because it's a bit of an ace of spades. You can only pull it out a few times. And you want to make sure that nobody knows about it, even in a very large project. If I'm making the screws and you're making the washers, and someone else is making the rivets, and someone else is making the, I'm using very, very basic components here, but I have no idea that at the end that's going to come out as the Trinity Project, Little Boy and Fat Man. So these are examples of how the secrecy is really what hides the technology. And we need to keep this in mind, because when we look at the UAP business, the whole disclosure thing is coming from these people, and I'll unpack this for us just so that we can see exactly what we're dealing with here. Because if we're trusting these people whose job it is to hide strategic information, why would they be coming forward with it now? Maybe they say, oh, Grush is some disgruntled employee that was, not looked after when he wanted to come forward. But it's a much deeper project. And so the military, as I said, is trying to control technology. It's trying to control the secrecy. And it's not just the military. As I mentioned, it's a rotating door of deep state actors, government, intelligence, so on and so forth. So one of the deepest secrets that the military also has, in addition to this UAP stuff, and even if you don't believe in UAPs and UFOs and all of that stuff, just think about some amazing advanced technology. We've looked at quite a lot of interesting patents. You can look up Salvador Cesar Piaz, or Piaz, and he's got, for example, stuff that involves electrogravitics and superconductors at room temperature. And our basic technology is already there. We've already looked at some of the contractual work that Bigelow Aerospace has had, looking into warp drives and quantum communication systems and metamaterials. I mean, our science is leaps and bounds beyond what the average person is aware of. And that's just what we know in public. Imagine what we don't know and is slowly released to us. And this is something we looked at in the previous StoryTime through the Legacy program that was designed. Remember, Philip Corso was trying to get us to be aware that the military isn't all bad. Some who kept the secrets for national intelligence and security were giving the patents to the public, or the private sector, which would then filter into the public. But he also mentions that this has been hijacked by a bunch of sociopaths who might be running this whole operation. So we need to be aware of this, because these two things have coupled together and they've made a love child. And that's the threat op, essentially. The threat op is my idea that all of these things that are coming together, and I'm now able to slightly better understand them over the months, and as I'm able to better put them together, I'm not pleased with what I'm seeing. I'm not pleased at all. In fact, there is cause for concern, and if we don't get a grip on it, there might actually be more severe problems if we're not already past a certain Rubicon. And what I mean by this is that the attempts at disclosure have been many. We've looked at this time and time again in this program. Disclosure has come forward through professionals, military experts, government officials, you name it. Over the years, all of them have come out. And even when you look at private endeavors to study the subject of UAPs and the UFO phenomena, even those have been quite fruitful when they haven't been injected with counterintelligence. Because again, when you start to get close to the technology, that's a national defense secret, and the CIA will, for example, the CIA will defend that even with deadly force. It's a no playing game sort of thing. Now, we need to start unpacking this whole story. So, grab yourself a cup of coffee or whatever your beverage of choice is. Sit back and relax, and let us bounce into a world that a lot of people like to call Neverland. It's a place sort of beyond, and a place without much reason holding it together. Now, let's not get too far off the track. As I mentioned, in StoryTime 22, our topic here is the COG, continuation of government, and on the other hand, it is the UAP phenomena. These two things coupled together, as I mentioned, with secrecy and with military precedence, because that's really where the apex forms, creates this thing called this threat op. And we have to now focus on the threat op, because these people are maybe not so trustworthy. And if what they're doing is not a trustworthy thing, it's an operation to fool us, to control the perception and the narrative. Now, you'll make up your own mind about this, but we're going to have a big deep dive. Where we're going to start first is good old Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is famous, absolutely famous, for all of its mentioning in so many different UAP and UFO accounts and tales of extraterrestrial beings being delivered there, and craft and technology. So that's the kind of context I want to put forward. And if you don't believe all of that, I encourage you to check out previous story times and just generally explore the topic. Many, again, even people like Richard Doty, who were counterintelligence officials, OFSI, who were complicit in the sending of people to their insanity for the kind of counterintelligence that confused the living reality out of people like Benevitz. Even he, over time, has given us little grains that slowly have proved in some way or another useful. It doesn't make him a good person, in my opinion. It doesn't make all the information he's saying true. But these people know what the truth is, and they know how to cover it. That's the whole point of counterintelligence. And so, as they've gotten older, many of them have begun to loosen up as many secrets have begun to come out and leak, and that was then. Now we're beyond that. We're at a point now where credible scientific endeavors have been taken to try and understand this phenomena, and we can see that we don't really understand what's happening here. There's all kinds of intersecting subjects that come into this, and so just a physicist or just an expert in consciousness or just an expert in hyperdimensional mathematics, that might not be enough. You might need all of that wrapped in one person for the kind of situation we find ourselves in now. And as I mentioned, just going a little bit further back, we're at a new junction in our history. And for me, this all kind of ties up with the meeting that happened on the 30th of April. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think the 30th of April belonged to... I'll show you now. I'll bring it up on screen. I just want to check my facts first before I put my foot in it, you know. All right, here we go. Yep, there we go. All right, so apparently the date of birth is disputed, but what was taught to me in my history books was that good old Adolf. He was born on the 30th of April, is what I knew, but apparently here it goes somewhere between the 20th and the 30th. But around this time, in April, what we had was a meeting of intelligence officials. And this was led by Avril Haines. So they meet at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. As I mentioned, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is renowned for its UFO history and other things. Let's pull that up on screen so that you can have a good look at this very obscure intelligence briefing here from the brief. There is good Avril Haines. And the topic is intelligence community leaders meet at Wright-Patterson for historic national security briefing. Okay. Now, Avril Haines is the Director of National Intelligence for the Biden administration. She is famously known as the Drone Queen because she worked with Brennan, who was head of the CIA at the time, and he was known as the Drone King. And so, as the little underling, she was the Drone Queen, and now the director. Now, Avril Haines, when you become head of the Director for National Security, the Director of National Intelligence, and you've also served as not only advisor, but, deputy director for the Obama administration for the CIA. You've got a person here who's under 2 administrations worked at the highest levels of the CIA. Now, what I want to remind everyone here is, although that there are many intelligence agencies in the alphabet soup of the United States, there are only 3 or 4 that are really the intelligence collectors, and they distribute the intelligence to the relevant officers. We'll see this, for example, with the National Reconnaissance Office. They will collect all the satellite data, and then they will give it appropriately to the different divisions that will then analyze it for their own means and purposes. Now, Avril Haines, as I mentioned, the Drone Queen, is not my favorite human, but she has now had this historic meeting on the 30th of April with all these big shots intelligence officials. Now, among them was the current CIA director. There he is there, William Burns. Let me blow up his beautiful CIA face there. And you can imagine that something like this would normally happen in Washington or in other, in Langley or wherever else the CIA normally meets, but they don't normally meet at an Air Force base. But they have at Wright-Patterson. And remember, they described this event as historic. And what were they speaking about? Let's have a look. So, because, all these intelligence officials start showing up and the press is caught a little bit flat-footed and they trying to figure out. And let's not forget as well that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is also home to the National Space Intelligence Center. I think it's called Air and Space, if I'm not mistaken. But that is really one of the key areas where they are able to do very powerful sensing and to really bring forward the very powerful technologies that they have for surveillance, basically. Surveillance for military application. And so they basically had this meeting. They gave the media a few flashy discussions, and one of the things that they were talking about was what's really important is to get facts about this, and this is basically relating to the UAP phenomena. Let me find you a good quote here just to square it front and center. So they talked about a couple of other things as well. For example, I think one of the things mentioned was a cyber nuclear threat. Let me just see if I can get a slightly better quote on what they were doing. But basically, they were here to talk about the UAP phenomena and to essentially brief the heads of the intelligence community. And this is why it was really historic, and this is why it's relevant that it's done at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as I mentioned, has been famously surrounded with controversy, specifically for the alien bodies and craft that are claimed to be there. So that they're having an historic meeting at this place. Food for thought. Now, the intelligence community meeting to talk about UAPs, and this is now April of this year. This is a few months just before Greer has his group and Grush has his disclosure, and it also comes just after the deflation of Lou Elizondo and the To the Stars Academy tried to do their push for, UAP congressional hearings, and they were really trying to push the subject and bring disclosure and show us videos that were released on YouTube in 2007 or whatever. But it's all a bit of an op, and all of it because it's surrounded by the CIA and the military and all these people. It's all a threat. These craft are tampering with our nukes, and they're having war with us, and they're abducting us, and for them, any penetration of airspace without approval would be seen as a viable target to shoot down. And that's why I say to the hammer, everything is a nail. And that's really, really bad. That's why I actually do respect Stephen Greer's point of view that, even if we met another nation, let's say we met an island of humans that we had never met before, and they were just as modern as we were, and I don't know, for some unknown reason we just never saw each other. We wouldn't just immediately see and shoot them. We would hopefully want to establish some kind of relation, some kind of established communication system, and do the ambassadorial, diplomatic coming together of cultures. Instead, if you leave it to the military, they're just going to quarantine the island and point nukes and say, okay, everybody disarm, okay, everybody tired, okay, now tell us who your leader is, and now tell us, are you a threat, and what is your rank, and that's how the military sort of treat things. So we have to be careful when they're the ones, along with the CIA and Haynes and Burns, CIA director, when they come forward, have a big meeting, and then months later we have this massive media attention on disclosure. we need to be a little bit careful. This is why I call it the threat op. And you can see that these intelligence community people are right from the continuation of government, UFO, aerospace, special access program group. All the things that they do are extremely shady, and I'll go as far as to say even illegal and unconstitutional, and it's been proven time and time again. I mean, let me put it this way. If you don't know what your average intelligence / military evil sociopath looks like, let me give you, recently we had a very interesting comment made by Mike Morrill on the Charlie Rose show. And let me just see if I can bring it up for you, because this will give you such a good idea of when we talk about the intelligence community, their job is to keep secrets, subvert, and use any means necessary, even beyond the law, to achieve goals. They're not just there to pick up information and inform the president, as was their original task. They now have their own illegal funding and programs, and they can take decisions that affect foreign policy, all to the chagrin of the nation, because even the president doesn't even have a grip on some of these individuals and their activities. So this is Mike Morrill. Just make sure that we bring this right to the start and that you can hear it, because it's a gem. And just so that you know, Mike Morrill, he's basically also, again, a career intelligence person. I mean, he's been there basically forever. And I think he was under the Obama administration and had, I think he came, I think he was preceded by David Petraeus. So you can see the line of illustrious military intelligence that he comes from. And this was what he said to Charlie Rose. Have a listen to this. It's just absolutely mind-bending.
I'd give them the things that they need to both go after the Assad government, but also to have the Iranians and the Russians pay a little price, right? When we were in Iraq, the Iranians were giving weapons to the Shia militia who were killing American soldiers, right? The Iranians were making us pay a price.
Now, think of how twisted that is, because through the discovery of the Iran-Contra, we learn how the CIA was smuggling guns to militia in order for all kinds of political ends. And there was obviously government corruption, because there was knowledge, or possibly all the way up to the president. That's why it was such a big scandal that the public came to know about. And so it's so funny that here he's talking about, like, oh, well, we were giving them guns that were killing our own people. Like, whoops. He doesn't say whoops, but he's got his own twisted logic for that sort of thing. But let's listen further.
We need to make the Iranians pay a price in Syria. We need to make the Russians pay a price. The other thing we
make them pay the price by killing Russians,
yes,
and killing Iranians,
yes, covertly,
of course, because let me use a little bit of vulgar language, because holy fucking shit, what you're doing is illegal, and if you're not doing it covertly, you go to jail. Excuse my French. I mean, these people are, they blow my mind. I really struggle. I mean, from when I was able to understand just how evil in general militaries and governments and intelligence services can be, you realize it's not an accident. It's not an accident that they are this way. Listen further.
So you don't tell the world about it, right? You don't stand up at the Pentagon and say we did this, right? But you make sure they know it in Moscow and Tehran.
The people who
you make sure they know, because you don't make it public, because again, it's illegal. It's actually not even illegal. It's unquestionably a amoral. It's not even immoral. It's like, I don't even have morals. I'm just trying to achieve a goal, and I might blow up a wedding with some civilians, but out of the 100 people, I got 2 militants. Mission accomplished. That's the kind of mentality that they are with, for example, Julian Assange, desperately trying to hide, because they know it's not, the public doesn't think that way, doesn't accept that, values human life, wants collaboration, wants people to uplift themselves and find a better future. But not if you're someone like this dude from the CIA. Let's listen a bit further.
Here's the other thing I want to do. I want to go after those things that Assad sees as his personal power base, right? I want to scare Assad. So I want to go after his presidential guard. I want to bomb his offices in the middle of the night.
Well, that happened about 2 years ago. As you remember, when his brother-in-law was...
Lol. Just lol. Like, well, I'd want to, bomb his brother-in-law in the middle of the night. He's like, oh, wait, didn't that happen just a few months ago? And the guy nods. He's like, yeah, actually, whoops, I guess. Slip of the tongue, look at a little smoke. He's like, yeah, well, guess that's declassified anyway. But I mean, the nerve. Let me again iterate that what he's saying here is a leader from another country that the United States should have nothing to do with. The United States is over here, Syria is like down here, separated by an ocean and like a continent. But America is trying to depose Assad, and they again can't change the world politics and obviously make it so obvious that they assassinated a world leader. They only do that when they really know they can get away with it. But it's a bit of a trump card. They keep that to themselves. Now, he's saying here that what we do instead of, ending up on front page news that I've assassinated the Syrian president Assad. No. Instead, what I'm going to do here, hi, my name's Mike Morrill. I'm going to instead, blow up his personal guard. I'll make sure in the middle of the night he's terrified that we're able to get to him at any point. I mean, listen to this guy.
I want to destroy his presidential aircraft on the ground. I want to destroy his presidential helicopters. I want to make him think we're coming after him, right? I'm not advocating assassinating him. I am not advocating that.
It's like when someone talks about Bitcoin on the internet and they're like, well, I'm not a financial expert, but in my opinion, they have to obviously add this little caveat. So here he is doing the same thing. He's like, well, I'm not advocating assassinating him, just blowing up his airplane on the runway, or maybe his I want him to know that we're after him. Let's finish this off.
I'm advocating going after what he thinks is his power base, right, and what he needs to survive. I want him to think about, this is not going to end well for me, right? I want to put pressure on him. I want to put pressure on the Iranians. I want to put pressure on the Russians to come to that diplomatic settlement. I'd give them.
So I mean, I don't know what to make of that. Like, that's so crazy. That tells me so much about what's happening, for example, in Russia and the Ukraine. Again, not excusing breaking of international law and invasion from one country to another, but there's more context to that. That's a very, very simplified, almost over too simplified view of the whole situation. And the moment you start scratching beneath the surface, you start to see this kind of crap. And we've looked at Project Gladio and the state of tension that they created in Europe during the 50s, 60s, and 70s in order to attack civilian targets, in order to keep the population afraid and wanting NATO to save them. This is the CIA for you. These are the intelligence services, MI6 and Mossad and all of them. In a sense, they're all playing the same game with different teams. They're not always working together. Some work together, some work against each other. It's always adversarial because that's how the military thinks. Now, what we call what we just saw there, give it whatever name you will other than sociopathic. Let me just pick one more for you. The key thing that just straight jumps out at me there is PSYOP. What you're trying to do is create a psychological operation, a threat operation, to Assad and the Iranians and the Russians. Notice he doesn't mention the Chinese. That was interesting. But let's go forward. He mentions basically creating a psychological operation of fear and intimidation on a foreign adversary. And you think he's not doing that to common people? Because remember, the gloves have come off after 9/11. Many Americans, and by virtue of being the superpower, the United States can exert its mentality of the Patriot Act even abroad and rendition people in any country they want. Pretty much. You know, who's going to stop them? Your United Nations and constitutions be damned, is what they'd probably say to you. It's not great. Now, going back to Avril Haines and the Drone Queen, she's meeting now with all these intelligence officials, people like Mike Morrell, doing psychological operations. They meet between the 20th and the 30th of April at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they discuss many things, including UAP phenomena and all of this stuff here. A few weeks later, we get major disclosure. But who do we get major disclosure from? The Washington Post couldn't run it. The New York Times couldn't run it. Not at that moment. So the next best publication was, of course, NewsNation. Now, NewsNation is where Grush gave his very famous interview with Ross Coulthard, and that's where he came forward with really shocking accounts of how, although he again put forward just claims, let me make that clear, he did not come forward with any evidence. All he said was, I don't want to say pure speculation, because he has now gone under oath and apparently has brought forward that information to the authorities, various authorities. So, you know, credit where credit is due. But he said that, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post, for example, knew about the story. They just couldn't push it in time. And, you know, they needed to do some checks and they needed to do some things. And he said, well, we needed to run with it very quickly. Well, why, Mr. Grush? David Charles Grush, did you need to push this thing very quickly? And the outlet that did this was NewsNation. Now, NewsNation, let me see if I can bring this up for us. So, one of the big people involved with NewsNation is good old Chris Cuomo, among other people. You know, it's seen as a little bit right-leaning or whatever the case is. But NewsNation not only has Chris Cuomo involved, let's just see if that gets mentioned here. And there it is. On October 3rd, 2002, former CNN anchor Chris Cuomo was terminated for advising his brother, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, about how to deal with various scandals. Joined the network with an evening program called Cuomo to replace the NewsNation Prime, thus fully converting the programming to personality-driven opinion and analysis shows. So there you go. Chris Cuomo is one of the main anchors, along with a couple of other people who are, you know, folk who will read what is put in front of them very professionally. And those that go to the intelligence services and the government for their news. So, the mockingbird media, as it were. And so, already, NewsNation, okay, they had to rush it, and they come to Chris Cuomo's network. I mean, it's not only his network, or he's not one of the only people there, but you know, he was the one involved in it. He's got ties into it. Let me just say. And then from that we get the big Ross Coulthard bombshell revelation. Now Ross Coulthard, he's got this British accent, but he was involved in Australia. He's also got he's also got a bit of controversy that follows him. And when I say controversy specifically, I'm not going to get into the exact this and this and that and that. That's all water under the bridge, in my opinion. For me, the most important thing is that it's kind of evidence of political and media chicanery. How, you know, some person might undermine another person. You know, it's kind of like school game bully tactics to get like ahead in your career. That's how I've interpreted some of that stuff. And so, you know, he comes from that kind of media making scene. And they have this big News Nation bombshell revelation. And Grush himself is an interesting sort. Now, David Grush, here's a picture of him. I think I've got one here for you just to refresh your memory. Here we go. So this is good old David Grush with all of his wonderful medals, all, you know, counterintelligence and you know, government organizations that I've never heard of, the NGA. You know, I make fun of that because even an organization like the National Reconnaissance Office, which he also is a part of, and we'll tie this in with Wright-Patterson, because Wright-Patterson, as I mentioned, has the National Space and Intelligence Center. Well, what does the National Space and Intelligence Center use is satellites. Who uses and controls and makes sure that all of that information goes through the right channels? The National Reconnaissance Office. And that office, we only found out about it in the like 90s. It had been around like 30 years, 20 years prior. And so who knows what branches of government, not branches, what sections of government offices have been created unbeknownst to the public. It's a little bit mind-bending. So this is David Grush. He comes together with his band of merry men, and they have this big UAP hearing. Here is the lot of them. Okay. So big UAP hearing. Here you can see Grush in the middle. These two flanking him left and right are good old Fravor, Commander Fravor, and Graves. These are pilots that had experiences, and they're pretty cool. They just tell their story, you know, as honestly as they can. They don't seem to be too aware of what's going on around them, and that's generally like the problem. Is even the public, they see this and they don't understand what's going on here. They don't understand that this dude, James Clapper, is, you know, good friends to I mean, not only everybody in the intelligence community, but he's also McCullough's protege. And who's McCullough? He's this dude in this blue tie. Put a picture of them together. Here we go. There's James Clapper, and there's McCullough the third. And these are heavyweights. James Clapper, as I mentioned, was caught lying to Congress under oath about mass surveillance. Didn't go to jail. He just resigned or was dismissed. I'm not too sure what the case is. I think he resigned before he was fired, something like that. And then, of course, McCullough is a heavyweight in the legal aspect of the intelligence community and mechanism. It is from him and people like Dick Cheney that we get the architecture for the Patriot Act for 9/11. 9/11, if you remember, they all crowded into a bunker, and then magically they came out with this massive Patriot Act. I mean, it was impossible that they wrote that as it came out from, from whatever it is, Mount Weather or some of the other deep underground military bunkers that they keep these people. And that's the continuation of government section, again, intersecting. So can you see how we went in such a spin from the National Reconnaissance Office to Grush to the CIA to Brennan to Clapper to McCullough. McCullough also was involved with Hillary Clinton in 2016 for her emails because, again, they needed someone of a very high intelligence ranking to be able to deal with the legal aspect of this. And in fact, it was so funny because in the middle of these, you can see he's sitting right behind Grush. Now, if this was like a public hearing, why is your lawyer not just sitting next to you? No. Yeah, this little intelligence cutout would lean in and Grush would snap his head back and, like a little bird, he'd chirp in his ear and tell Grush what to say and how to respond. I mean, he must have done it like 20, 30 times. So, again, intelligence agents all getting together, having a fat party in front of Congress, and these are the types of people that are feeding information into Grush's ear. And Grush is now feeding that information to Congress. And I don't know if I trust all of that. Okay, this is George Knapp over here taking a bit of a snooze. And this is his partner, Jimmy Corbell. They were part of the first wave of this CIA disclosure through the TTSA, which is the To the Stars Academy, with Tom DeLonge from Blink-182, and just a whole host of CIA cutouts like Lua Elizondo and all these other folk. And you can see the first attempt at the threat op. Now, these guys all meet, and they all telling Congress amazing things: UFOs, bodies, reversal programs, alien threats, and that's where it starts to come in. Oh, they've attacked our pilots. Oh, there've been incidents. Oh, they've disabled missiles. Oh, they've pushed them off trajectory. Oh, they might be adversarial humans from the future. I mean, there's just mind-bending stuff that they just spouting out. It's like they're throwing the spaghetti on the wall and just waiting to see what sticks. I don't know if I buy that exactly. So this is interesting to me, that at the beginning of this whole thing, Avril Haines and the intelligence community meet at Wright-Patterson, which is phenomenally famous for its UFO background. And then a few months later comes Grush with a whole bunch of CIA people just whispering in his ear as he petitions to Congress that these things are a threat and that he's been, oppressed and stuff. Now, I don't want to get into it too much. But David Grush has been in the news lately, and I want to talk to you about that in the next hour of this show. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just remind you that you're listening to Storytime, episode 22. This is the COG, continuation of government, or continuity of government, as the Americans say, and the UAP UFO file, smashing together and making a beautiful love child called the Threat Op. And that is really what we're going to square and make sure that we get that nicely in focus, because as we see here, already the people surrounding Grush are obsters, all of them. I don't know, I wouldn't trust them as far as I can sling a piano. Now, as I mentioned, the News Nation, for what it's worth, they've made... in fact, they've been famous for being trolled and coming out with fake information that they've had to then double back and retract. And as I mentioned, one of the things that have come out in line with that, where again they've had to sort of double back, because Grush told Coulthard in their exchange that he had had no prior mental any problems, medical, everything was perfect check. And then recently, Grush has come into the news, unbeknownst or unwillingly, because somebody filed a $250 FOIA request for his medical records when he was admitted into there was a case of some domestic disturbance, and then from that there was evaluation, and then he was admitted into a psychiatrical ward. Something like that. Again, I don't want to get into the specifics because for me it's not so important, and I encourage you to check it out because it might be important and interesting to you. But I want to glance over this very quickly because I don't want to wrap myself up in the gossip so much as to say that Grush wasn't expecting this, I don't think, because here he is surrounded by all these wonderful CIA people that are telling him, oh, we'll support you and we'll tell you what to say, and don't worry, no harm will come to you, and, you're a whistleblower. And instead, a simple person can just be like, oh, here's $250 FOIA request, and oh, look at this. He had mental problems, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, especially if you're in the military, you're going to have mental stress, which may result in all kinds of things. But then don't lie about it on News Nation and then not mention that you weren't quite honest about it. At least, News Nation should do their due diligence as a news organization, but they're just kind of like, kind of just play it off and say whatever. Now, as I mentioned, this is not to discredit Grush as a human being, but any person, and it sounds a bit cruel, but it's not, because any person that makes life-changing and humanity-changing claims is going to come under the microscope. I'm sorry, I don't care who you are, and I'm sorry that this is just the way the world works, but if you tell me that there is life after death, or that we're just infinite consciousness where time and space is just an illusion, great. Now, show me the evidence. I want to see how you understand what you do. And if you can't, then it's just your opinion, And this is half the problem with Grush, is that feels like he's protected by these people with this very sensitive information and the skiff, and every time he gets asked a difficult question, oh, we'll just go into closed session, and that doesn't sound like disclosure and whistleblowing and honesty to me. It sounds like, a patsy being driven. And again, I think Grush did not expect these little bumps in the road. They didn't tell him that people would be able to pull up his medical history and basically say, well, oh, whoops, you kind of told a little bit of a lie there, And I think that that's totally good and normal in a certain sense. If you're, for example, a journalist, you're going to ask in a court of law, or if you were a lawyer or a journalist, you would want to know the credibility of the person, because in a court of law, if you were presenting your argument, you'd want to say, is this person able to tell the truth, and has he had or she had any previous experience of fabricating non-truths, aka lies? And then if that's the case, judgment should be considering that. And so when Grush tells these little secrets, or not secrets, little lies along the way, it's important that we keep track of that. Because, as I said, I think it, to me at least, looks like it came to as a surprise to him. And that's funny, because to me it's like, I just imagine that if I'm coming forward telling the world that there's these amazing things, again, as I said, life after death and whatever, and aliens, and people are going to ask questions, rightfully so, and they're going to say, okay, well, who are you, and where do you come from, and where is this information coming from, and can you prove it, and what can you corroboration, collaboration for the truth. And that needs to be open source, not in secret government studies that they can then manipulate and turn into trash, just a hot mess of rubbish, counterintelligence, psyops. So it's normal to come under scrutiny if you're making incredible claims, and it's shocking to me that Grush was taken aback by the fact that someone was able to pick up a very simple FOIA request and discover stuff about him. And that tells me that he didn't expect to have holes in his armor. He was probably being told that he was being protected. And I think this was the first example where he sees that he's not infallible. In fact, he's the bait that they dangle. At least that's my opinion. We'll see. Time will tell. And, so it's important that we keep this in mind about David Grush and Avril Haines and Burns and Clapper. And I mean, if that doesn't start to just shout deep state, I don't know what does, Chris Cuomo and all of that. And as I mentioned, in all of this is the NGA, the NSA, the CIA, Space Force. It is a mishmash of just people that can do incredible things. And by incredible things, that sounds amazing, and yes it is, but those things aren't used for peaceful and purposefully positive things. No, it's used to subvert and destroy and achieve political ends through illegal means if necessary. So it's a different ball game. And again, well, not again, but I do also want to just reiterate this thing that although there is this alphabet soup of people meeting, I want to just mention that we often point to the CIA or the NRO or the DIA or the DNI, I should say, sorry, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. These few of the huge alphabet soup, octopus tentacle hydra are the ones that actually go out and retrieve the information and then give it to the other intelligence agencies. For example, the NRO, they give the signals intelligence, the SIGINT, to the NSA. They give the image analysis and intelligence to the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And I don't know what MASINT is in total. It's measurement and signature. MASINT. Measurement and Signals Intelligence. And that goes to the Defense Intelligence Agency. But I don't exactly know what measurement and signature intelligence is. I believe it's a technical branch, but compared to the others, I don't know how to differentiate it. And I think that's the way they like to keep it. Anyways, moving forward. So, as I mentioned, if it smells like an op, it looks like an op, it must be an op. And these guys are telling us not to be peaceful ambassadors, or at least try and put forward a peaceful foot, whilst maybe being a bit more defensive and open with the population. No, instead it's like, well, we'll just shoot anything out the sky and don't worry, we got it covered. You don't need to know anything. We'll just make lots of laws and get lots of money from Congress, and with a bit of secrecy, everything will be solved. And I'm not convinced. I never have been, to this day. And again, one of the reasons I'm not convinced is we mentioned in the previous story time that already we're starting to see schisms within this op. I mean, we're talking about Grush, but let's not forget that the head of the of RO, Sean M. Kirkpatrick, he was the one who recently, along with the Pentagon, contradicted Grush and all his testimonies and all the evidence and stuff that they apparently are bringing forward to Congress in closed session and through SCIFs. And he said, in fact, let's have a look at his letter. Let's see exactly what he said, because he contradicted them and said, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Practically, you're off the rails. I don't know if what you're doing is perfectly within the legal constitution, well, within the legal terms of what RO's objectives are. And so this is a copy of the letter that he brought forward shortly after the hearing. And I'll just read this bottom part. He says, I'm deeply disappointed at the denigration of RO's dedicated men and women. He says the subcommittee, whose questions and oversight duties are irreproachable and in genuine need of answers, has never asked RO for an update on the reporting system, the historical review, the operations, the S&T strategy, and RO leads in its undertaking. A rational person watching the hearing might reasonably assume that both the witnesses and the members had an understanding of the department and the intelligence community's progress since the establishment of RO around this time last year, only naturally leading them to conclude that RO has been ineffective, non-transparent, and delinquent in its legislative mission. RO briefs the Defense and Intelligence Committees regularly, and since the last NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act for Homeland Defense, and we'll get into that, the Homeland Defense and S&T and several other committees as well. So he's basically saying we constantly brief these committees. They've had ample opportunity to ask us questions. But the subcommittee with all this other stuff is in genuine need of answers. They must explain why they're not using our channels that were set up. And there you can see the schism. You can see that the left hand is not talking to the right hand at all. And there is obviously not a cohesive deep state. There are people in the deep state and a power struggle of people, whether politically, you got people like the Cuomo families or whatever, the Mellon family, the Trumps and the Kennedys and many others. These are all politicians that are involved deeply in the knowledge of this UFO phenomena and the technology that we sort of have come across from it. So again, this all is spelling a deep psychological operation against us. I don't know how I feel about that other than just simply disgusted, because we've seen this time and time again. And again, the second point I want to make in this next half here is simply that these people, or very few of them, I'm not saying that every military person and government person is a sociopath and insane and evil, but the small group that are at the top end up being at the top because they have no sense of morality. Or if they do, it's just, it doesn't come with any form of emotional backlash. They just kind of like evil spiders. They just eat their prey half alive and think nothing of it. It's the nature of their beast. And I say this, I know that sounds harsh, but let me try and explain why I'm telling you how evil these people can be. Because already hiding, I mean, if you got military operations that you need hidden because of sources and methods for national security, I could maybe entertain that argument. But where you're keeping some of the technology that can be used for at least some of that technology used peacefully, or at least the knowledge of extraterrestrial life and the social implications that it has for us as a species to grow in our intellect and our spirituality, why keep that from us? Because you don't want people asking questions is the answer, because then you have to start talking about it. So these people don't want the truth to come forward. So either something's forcing them, or they are deliberately bringing it forward in some kind of a way. Now, I just want to be clear here that although I'm discrediting all of this, I'm not saying that the phenomena does not exist. In fact, the whole point of this is to try and separate the chaff from the wheat, from the CIA up and the deep state actors, and the COG, the continuity of government, versus real people that are trying to bring humanity forward and bring us to a higher level of awareness, so that we can tackle our problems and be a better species altogether and be more collaborative and not fight over oil and the colors of our pigment. It's kind of stupid when you look at it in the grand context of being celestial beings, you know? I mean, the aliens must put their 3D glasses on and grab their popcorn and be like, oh, what's on Channel Earth today? And just watch like chaos everywhere and be like, what the f are these kids are crazy. You know, it's like the Jerry Springer show for them, probably. Okay. Let's move on to the second half. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go forward for about another hour or so and then wrap up. And in the second half here, I was mentioning that the deep state actors are literally sociopaths because this phenomena is real. Something very tangible has happened, and often in really big, very public events. So what I'm trying to say there, for example, is the public have had throughout the years very visceral experiences with these phenomena. Some of it, as I mentioned, is going to be fake. Some of it is going to be so not only people making up stories, but people actually embedding psyops to discredit whatever truth might be there. And then there's a very small category of huge sightings by many people throughout many years of these events that have absolutely captured our imagination and begged questions. But because the media and government and the authorities keep calling our experiences because they keep calling our experiences unreasonable and fabrications of our imagination and things like that, people feel discredited. They don't talk about what they say, and so we don't discuss openly. Now in 2023 things have changed, but let's have a look back. Okay, now it's funny, you know, we mentioned Tom DeLonge, who's part of Blink-182, but another popular band in that same genre are the Foo Fighters. Now, where do the Foo Fighters get their name from? The Foo Fighters get their name from basically little lights and orbs that would chase World War II fighters. Let me just pull that up here. So this would be what, the 1930s and 40s. So, excellent. Okay. So, this is a Foo Fighter article from Wikipedia. The term Foo Fighter was used by Allied craft pilots during World War II to describe various unidentified flying objects or mysterious aerial phenomena seen in the skies both over Europe and Pacific theaters of operation. They initially described a type of UFO reported and named by the US 415th Night Fighter Squadron. The term was also commonly used by many other UFO sightings from that period. Now remember, in 1933, the whole Roswell thing had not even happened. We weren't thinking, we were still calling them at the time disc or saucer-shaped craft. You know, so the whole concept is at its early point of evolution. They don't have these fancy terms like we do, like trans, medium, entities, and whatever, EBEs, and you know, we got thousands of acronyms now as they've rebranded the whole UFO idea. But a Foo Fighter was formally reported from 1994 onwards and presumed to be witnessed by were presumed to be witnesses to secret weapons employed by the enemy. So some of them thought these were craft from, you know, the adversaries. We have intelligence reports, for example, Die Glocken or the Bell, which was what the Nazis were working on, which possibly had electrogravitic technology in it, you know, spinning mercury, plasma stuff. But this is where the term comes from, Foo Fighters, right? The UFOs that they were spotting very, very early on. And this wasn't, you know, such a big psyop thing. This was just pilots that were reporting what they were seeing, and it became a popular term that eventually caught on as the alien phenomena began to come into the mind of regular people, you know. And then, of course, we had shortly after, because now remember, in the 1940s is when we work on the nuclear program. We drop 2 nuclear weapons on innocent civilians. And we kick off the nuclear arms race with the Soviets. I say we, in this case, I'm thinking of myself as America here, but America basically dropped 2 nuclear weapons and created this nuclear race. And it's odd that the phenomena seems to want to observe these test sites and the nuclear facilities, and they mess with the weapons and the systems and stuff like that. So in 1952, there was another really big sighting, the Washington D.C. UFO incident. And what's great is that as we go forward a little bit more closely, more media begins to come out as technology gets better and people can take photos and video, and there's movies and film made about these kinds of things. So this was in 1952. A series of unidentified flying objects or sightings were reported in Washington, D.C. This became known as the Washington Flap because it happened for a couple of days, if I'm not mistaken. And it was also noted as the Washington National Airport sighting, or the invasion of Washington. Obviously, that's the sensationalist version, but it was most publicized. It was one of the most publicized sightings that took place on consecutive weekends in during July 19 and July 26th that week there. UFO historian Curtis Peebles called the incident the climax of the 1952 UFO flap. Never before or after did the Project Blue Book and the Air Force undergo such a tidal wave of UFO reports. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, obviously, but, obviously, the Air Force and the military get involved, and people see this, and, things are apparently seen in the sky, and aircraft are scrambled, and it looks like a battle, There's all these lights and things like that. I think I might even have... Now, at the time, obviously, radio was far more popular, so there's very little video, unfortunately, that I can show you. But... So this was the Battle of D.C., 1952. I want to just mention here, there was this clip put forward. So one of the few official statements that the government and the military did put forward was through Major General John A. Stamford. It's very boring, so I'm not going to play the whole piece, but the person that was then interviewed after him made a very sensational point. Now, let me just make sure I'm not blasting your eardrums here. Okay. So this here's the general, the Major General that's talking to the media, and as you can see, he looks extremely bored. He's giving sort of one-word answers.
To discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
And then he goes on to say that basically, according to his analysis, it was probably just a weather balloon. Where did that come from? But listen to the person that who testifies after him, and then the video immediately cuts. I'll just go a little bit back. So here the Major General is going to tell us that what they saw, he flatly denies that it's any secret military program or training exercise or test craft, and that it's nothing of that sort. It's just a weather balloon kind of thing.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
Okay, now listen to this dude.
I'll start when you throw it down. Yeah. Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
And that dude was Kehoe himself. In one of our early story times, even we looked at one of the letters where even Carl Jung wrote a letter to Kehoe about the concepts of this new understanding that humanity is encountering craft and perhaps beings from another planet. So that was 1952, the Washington, D.C. incidents. And again, more Foo Fighters, the army being dispatched, the media getting into a frenzy, hundreds of people citing it. It made newspapers for days, and it didn't happen just 1 week, it happened multiple weeks. So either it's some kind of mass hysteria, or some people think it was secret craft that the government was testing or something, but it's amazing. It's really bizarre. And then again, just a few years later, and sorry, let me not get too far off there. I also want to mention that we have one of the people that spoke at that United States Air Force hearing was Edward James Ruppelt, and Ruppelt was very famous for bringing forward the concept of Project Blue Book. Blue Book was the code name for a UFO study program that the United States Air Force had from like 1950 something till 1969. And then obviously it had other preceding projects like Grudge, and it became Blue Book, and then it probably now has changed over time. So Ruppelt wrote a book about this incident as well, and him and Kehoe went and did NICAP, which was the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, in 1956, which was a private group of scientific experts trying to get to the bottom of this phenomena. So you can see already in 1952 that disclosure was sort of coming out. And then again further. This is the Phoenix Lights. Actually, sorry, before we get to the Phoenix Lights, let's get to the Battle of LA. Of course, we mustn't forget that one. I almost did. Let me call that up. Because there was the Battle of Washington, D.C. And then there was this. The Battle of Los Angeles. Los Angeles? Alright. So this is the Wikipedia article. Again, milquetoast, but give us the basic rundown. Again, more than when it happened, more than the hype that happened in DC, here in LA, more people saw it. There was heightened awareness and media publication, because this was also just off the back of Pearl Harbor. So the military was also super alert. The public was ready for attack from the Japanese. The skies were being patrolled and scanned, and the military launched in an instant. And so the Battle of Los Angeles is also known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, is the name given to the contemporary sources, the rumored attack on the continental United States by Imperial Japan, and subsequent anti-aircraft artillery barrage which took place because there were these lights, spotlights that were trying to check these craft, and then of course the aircraft gunnery began to fire off, and so people really thought that they were under attack by the Navy. But it wasn't the Japanese, apparently. And, the government kind of blew it off as, I think they basically said it was like a false alarm, or, oh no, it was, just a test or something like that. But this is still a subject of very deep study because, as I said, this was on national radio. The Air Force was scrambled. Radar was picking things up. And these lights were not like aircraft that move. They were stationary and then moving fast, and like these kind of UAP phenomena do. And in fact, for this Battle of Los Angeles, we actually had some pictures in the publications and in the media, and we also had, of course, the radio transmission. So maybe let's have a listen to that. Let me see if I can bring that up for you. Just a smidge in a sec. All right. So for those of you that are busy listening and aren't watching the audio, my apologies. Some of the stuff is pretty cool to look at, and I'll read you the subtitles for this little clip here. So February 25, 1942. Less than 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor and less than 36 hours after the bombardment of Elwood, at 2:15 a.m., radar detects an unidentified flying object off the coast of Los Angeles, heading towards the western coast of the United States. It was basically flying over the continental America. Due to fears of a possible attack, air raid sirens were sounded, a total blackout of the city was ordered, and the military was put on green alert, ready to fire. Awoken by the sirens, hundreds of thousands of residents watched in awe as searchlights scanned the night sky, covering a large, orangish object in the night sky. There's a picture of some of the objects. You can see it quite clearly there, kind of triangular, right? With the unknown object over the city, artillery units began firing anti-aircraft shells at the object. Over 1,400 shells would be fired and expended. Military and civilian witnesses reported that many of the shells hit the object but had no effect on it.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout ordered by the 4th Interceptor Command at 2:25 a.m. The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach. Army officials declined to comment on the possibility that the object might have been a blimp. However, it required nearly 30 minutes to travel some 25 miles, far slower than an airplane. Watchers on the rooftop of the Columbia Broadcasting Building in the heart of Hollywood could plainly see the flashes of guns and searchlights sweeping the skies in a wide arc along the coastal area. Concussion of the shells could be felt in downtown Los Angeles, 15 miles away. U.S. Army planes quickly took to the dark skies, but whether they contacted the object has not been announced. Army officials say they will not comment until they receive a full report of the action. Although some watchers say they saw airplanes in the air, semi-official sources say they probably were the U.S. Army's pursuit. Several observers say they saw one or more planes spotlighted by 20 or 30 searchlights. The object moved southward, presumably over Huntington Park at the western edge of Los Angeles, and on southward to about Long Beach on the coast. By 3:30 a.m., observers said the object appeared to be over the south of Long Beach. Searchlights closely followed the object down the coast and kept it centered in their glare. Shells frequently could be seen bursting near the object, but none appeared to hit it. The shooting stopped about 3:30 a.m. The shooting brought warfare to the front door of this city of 1.25 million population for the first time since December 7th. Already it was alert to the presence off the Southern California coast of a Japanese submarine which had pumped 25 shells into an oil field north of Santa Barbara Monday evening. Because of the presence of the submarine, a 3-hour alert was ordered at dusk last night, and civilian authorities stood at their posts while the Army and Navy continued their search for the submersible. The evening alert ended at 10:23 p.m., but another was sounded at 2:22 a.m., and the blackout followed within 3 minutes. It covered Los Angeles County from Santa Monica to Pomona. At 2:27, all Southern California radio stations were ordered off the air, except those in San Diego. Approximately 20 minutes after the firing died down, the ship returned and headed westward from Long Beach toward Santa Monica. The guns went into action again, hurling round after round of shells at the object. The second barrage appeared to be closer to downtown Los Angeles, since watchers could hear the concussion of the guns more clearly, and the flash of bursting shells was brighter. Then the ship disappeared for the second time over the ocean. We return you now to CBS in New York.
So despite hundreds of thousands of witnesses, the government claimed that the entire event had been a false alarm. Due to the number of witnesses, the government eventually changed its story. The object had been a weather balloon, apparently. Allegedly. The government would use the same explanation of the weather balloon 5 years later, in Roswell, New Mexico. So, ain't that something? I'll pull up one more, a little bit more recent. I think you all have heard of the Phoenix Lights. Here they are, here. Sometimes called the Lights over Phoenix, a series of widely sighted unidentified flying objects observed in the skies over the southwestern states of Arizona and Nevada on March 13th, 1997. Lights of varying descriptions were seen by thousands of people between 7:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. In a space of about 300 miles. That's about 480 kilometers for the rest of the world. From the Nevada line through Phoenix, the edge of Tucson, and some witnesses described seeing what appeared to be huge carpenter square-shaped UFOs containing 5 spherical lights, which were there were 2 distinct events involved in the incident. A triangular formation of lights seen to pass over the state, and a series of stationary lights seen in the Phoenix area. So, again, I'm not going to go too deep into this, and I just wanted to bring your attention to these reports, right? Real sightings of all kinds of phenomena have been happening to humans even before we were able to put hypersonic planes up in the sky. It was only in some of these events that we scrambled some of the first Lockheed afterburn capable craft, like the XF-96, I think it was called. And these planes were all scrambling to try and intercept these jets. Now, you might think that that's a psyop, but again, it's to me a phenomena that seems to create more of a problem for the government to explain and has no real objective because there's no spin. Now there's a lot of spin. You can see what they want. Oh, the UFOs are a threat. We need money. We need secrecy. Back then it was like, no, you're all crazy. Shut up. We don't want to talk about UFOs. And that is the final military response. You guys are all UFO conspiracy theorists. So the military didn't want to hear anything about it. So there seems little incentive to create these massive, massive sightings of craft, unless they were, again, back-engineered craft, some of them. It's not impossible. But these sightings have been happening even before we had decent airplanes. So even before Roswell, so even before the accounts begin to say that we start reverse engineering this stuff. So it's interesting. And I just want to make this little side note because this will come up in a future story time, but the mystery schools have been advanced in their understanding that there is contact with some other kind of intelligent consciousness. And so that's why you often see the occult tying in with the aerospace programs, like with Jack Parsons and CERN and Oppenheimer reciting the Bhagavad Gita when they drop the nuclear weapons on Japan. There's a little occult tinge to all of this because before there was the technology, there was the mind technology that we had access to try and interface with this intelligent consciousness from somewhere else. Now, the reason I was trying to point all of these all of these sightings, mass sightings, where the military responds with great force, kind of makes sense because that's what the military does. The moment they see something and it doesn't respond to their commands, they just, searchlights and artillery. And I just wanted to point out that we've had these mass sightings for a long time. The phenomenon's been with us for a long time. So some of it might be back engineered, some of it might not. But not all of it is. And some of it is genuine phenomena. And this is the part that I think has been, the military's been aware of for so long that they're now able to sort of ride the wave of deceit, as it were. And with these public sightings that we've seen over the years, and there's lots of media actually telling us that these sightings are increasing, and it's actually quite amazing to see. We also need to just remember that some of them, although might be man-made, some of them are not. The man-made one are the ones we need to be conscious of, or we need to be aware of. Not specifically the craft, but what the craft represents, where that technology comes from, who's controlling it, and what is their role in the greater scheme of how a country functions, or in some cases doesn't function. And this is going to propel us into the new dimension that we need to keep in mind. And I don't mean that in a literal dimension, but I mean this in the terms of a different perspective of our everyday lives. I think the people who, at the top of a continuation of government structure, see us as ants, and we need to see what they see. We need to be aware of how we are portrayed on the food chain to these elites. And so to kind of highlight that as we move away from discussions about these UAP, UFO sightings being with us, and now the CIA and the military beginning to spin these narratives and bring forward the media and bring forward whistleblowers and people that have been worked for the CIA but have also got abduction stories or personal accounts, and this is what they're shoving down our throats now. And when we compare it to sightings in the past, to studies we've done in the past, we can begin to see what is the threat op and what is actually a real phenomena that requires all of humanity to keep careful attention on, in a real sense. In other words, we might be not alone in this universe, so there is massive implications. Now, obviously, the intelligence services and governments have studied what the religious and social and psychological effects would be on the public, but they haven't afforded us the opportunity to make those decisions for ourselves so much. Now it's a little bit different in 2023 as for example, look at this article here. This is Avi Loeb and good old Fitzpatrick, the head of RO that's having a good old tussle with Grush in a very public scene about this disclosure business. But here he is collaborating with the professor of astronomy, Avi Loeb, and here they are openly talking on Politico in the defense section. Note the alien motherships. Pentagon official floats a theory for unexplained sightings. One astronomy professor called the notions highly questionable and odd. The paper explains that interstellar objects such as the cigar-shaped Oumuamua, the scientists spotted flying through the galaxy in 2017, could potentially be a parent craft that releases many smaller probes during its passage to Earth. I want to pause on this for just a moment because, you know, some people will discredit this straight out the way and be like, oh, well, it's just an asteroid or a meteor or whatever the case is. But if you scratch below the surface and you read the paper, I mean, they literally, it's hasn't been properly peer reviewed and therefore properly published. Let me see if I got my hands on it. And easily available, easy to reach. Yes, here we go. Ha. So they make this paper here, the two of them. So, I mean, this is a full-on scientific paper that they write here. The extraterrestrial possibility. I mean, they're setting up sensors on top of the university. They're getting funding. I mean, it's no longer fringe theory, and credible scientists seem now able to talk about this. And in Congress, we seem able to talk about this. And the public are open to the discussion about this. So it's more important than ever that we keep our eyes on the obsters trying to give us the bait and switch and feed us instead lies and psyops and, oh, this is all a threat and, you know, trust us, we're the government, we'll tell you the truth and protect you, versus real people just asking real questions, trying to study this at most basic level that they can together, open source information, nothing hidden. You know, that's the one thing I said with the Grush disclosure. I was like, you know, if it was really disclosure, they would have showed up with UFOs and brought an alien with them. It's like, why must everything be in a skiff and behind closed doors? They shouldn't treat the general public like children, and then unfortunately they do. So, as I mentioned, as we move away from this UAP stuff, well, actually we're not moving away from it. All we're doing is plugging in the final component, because the love child needs two beautiful parents. I'm obviously being incredibly sarcastic here, because on the one hand you have these intelligence, community, military, government obsters completely treating us like cattle and worse than children. We're literally taught to be like sheep, like cattle, livestock, as it were. You know, don't ask questions and do your 9 to 5 and consume until you're just barely able to go on pension and enjoy the last few years of your life, and then the wheels on the bus go round and round. So that's what they ideally would like, but we're smarter than this. We're evolving. We're in an information-rich environment, and even though they try and muddy the waters, we're keeping up in some way, shape, or form. So, as I said, on the one hand, the love child comes from the UFO side, but now we need to bring in the second parent, parent B, which is the continuity of government. COG. And it's a doozy. Now, it's a doozy because continuity of government, we've talked about it many times before. It links very closely to the highest levels of military secrecy and engagement. And what I mean by engagement is literally conflict. Continuity of government is what happens if the worst were to occur. How do we keep some form of political structure? How do we keep some form of our humanity, or the humanity that we choose as being on our side, alive during a catastrophic, nuclear war or some other type of cataclysm? So whilst these are reasonable things to understand and prepare for, what is unacceptable is the continuity of government falls way, way beyond general law, morality, and public focus, because we should all try be helping each other to stand the best chance possible. We are a collaborative species. We are not the fastest nor the most biggest toothed, largest clawed animal on the face of the planet, but we do have a damn good brain. And so when we work together, that's when we can make nuclear weapons. And so it's when we talk about these breakaway civilizations, these are groups of humanity that have these incredibly powerful technologies and infinite resources in a sense, and therefore work outside the constraints of what you and I do in terms of, paying bills and having to go to work and follow laws. They easily work outside of the law, and with continuity of government, there is this facade that it is part of law, because some of it is, legitimately. There is, for example, the Office of Emergency Planning was from the 40s to, I guess, the late 60s, 70s. And, this is Eisenhower Truman thinking, where basically they want to try and ensure that, in fact, let's bring up this article while we're chatting. They basically wanted to make sure during the time of super nuclear tension that no matter what happened in a conflict with an adversary that had very powerful weapons, that they would be able to survive and retaliate. So they needed some kind of government structure, some kind of order that would be able to survive and then respond and then, hopefully be the victor. Is what they have in their crazy minds. Obviously, the concept of mutually assured destruction has kept many nuclear-capable countries from going kinetic with their weapons to achieve their political ends. It's seen as really the start of Armageddon when the first nuke starts to go off, because there's just no limitation. And, that's kept us going for now, but we're very close to nuclear annihilation as far as the doomsday clock goes. But this Office of Emergency Planning, it got a bit of an update in 1982 up to about 1994-ish. It became the National Project, the National Project for the 908 Project. Let me know, that sounds wrong. Let me I remember it was called the 908 Project, so let's call that up. And then from there we'll get its official title. It's kind of like the Patriot Act, it's called the Patriot Act, but it's got a very long acronym embedded in it. So the National Program Office, NPO, was an office used in the United States government established to ensure continuity of government in the event of a national disaster. Was established by a secret executive order, National Security Decision Directive number 55, signed on the 14th of September 1982 by Ronald Reagan during the Cold War, in preparation for nuclear war, presumably with the Soviet Union. I mean, why else would you need all these weapons and, intelligence and a secret space program. I mean, must obviously be for the Soviet Union. But what I chuckle about there is that, we have through leaked memos and people who have come forward, even Gorbachev himself and his son, mentioned that, Russia and Russia, which was then the Soviet Union, and the United States, through John F. Kennedy, were trying to actually collaborate in space and have joint lunar missions and use it as a platform for scientific, peaceful relationships. So that, instead, when Kennedy was assassinated, it all just went completely pear-shaped, and it went straight into the weaponization of space, and the Soviet Union once again was an incredibly dangerous adversary that they needed to subvert. And so we can read here that also the NPO plan was classified as top secret, code word Pegasus. It was only referred to as Project 908, known as 908. The only oversight was by Project Pegasus Committee, chaired by then Vice President Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. The committee included the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or his deputy, FBI Director, and the Attorney General at the time, Edwin Meese III, and a couple of other top cabinet officials. The action officer for the project was Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who then worked for the National Security, and retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Robert McFarlane. Now, here we start to get involved with the people who run this whole thing. And one thing that Professor Peter Dale Scott has brought forward, because there's I've seldomly read such well studied and very purely academic, sober analysis as that of Dr. Peter Dale Scott's, Professor Peter Dale Scott. He's written extensively about the continuation of government, or continuity of government, and he's the one that gave us a lot of the really rich information, and he's the one that goes to great lengths to show how this National Program Office in 1982 gets extended. It gets a major upgrade in the late 90s, and then a major change in 2001 because of September 11th. Because from September 11th, that emergency and national crisis, what did we get? We got the Patriot Act and Homeland Security. And let's bring our minds back to the beginning of this show. Who's one of the architects of this incredible piece of legislature that took away habeas corpus and many rights and created a militarized nation in America? Well, of course, it was our good friend McCulloch. McCulloch and Dick Cheney. There's a political commentator called Jackson Hinkle, and when he finishes his podcast, he always ends it with F. Dick Cheney. And I have to agree with him, Evil dude. But him and McCulloch were the architects of the Patriot Act, Homeland Security, and all of that. So keep this in mind as we go forward. And the real thrust of the COG thing, the main concept here is that these are the few people that have the deepest secrets about how they would survive the most severe strike and then somehow continue forward some kind of humanity after just absolute devastation. And also how to destroy their adversary at the same time, the retaliation. So these are doomsdayers. These are people that are thinking in ways that normal humans just shouldn't be in a natural, spiritual way. It's a risk that only a sociopathic person would be willing to take, on both sides. I'm not just saying America or the Soviet Union or Russia or China or whoever. And the other thing I wanted to just stress here is that this was all created with secret executive orders. National Security Decision Directive number 55. Okay. So these executive orders, secret executive orders, create these incredible and extremely powerful triggers and mechanisms in government that the public and a lot of the rest of government have no idea about. And every time that there's an emergency, lo and behold, you've got COG people involved. Like, for example, Oliver North. He was around during the, if I'm not mistaken, the Iran-Contra. I mean, even if you go back to JFK, there's COG people there. And obviously, we came across Cheney and McCullough for 9/11. So every time there's this, what Professor Peter Dale Scott calls a deep event, you will see these kinds of shifty characters involved, because in their minds, as the military, they're the top dogs, and anything of relevance to the nation, they have to be ready at a hairbreadth's notice to completely suspend the Constitution and turn the country into a hyper militarized preservation capsule, essentially. A slave nation until further notice. It's the scariest thing. If you think Corona and staying in your house and not being able to go like outside of your city or your town was a big deal, I mean, baby, you ain't seen nothing yet. So this is really what we need to be worried about. And I don't say worried in the sense that you should, rock yourself to sleep in tears and pull your hair out. Worried in the sense of just cautious, having a sharp eye. If you can see the ball coming, you'll be able to catch it. It's an awareness problem that they are engaging with. If they keep us distracted, we won't notice these crazy things that they've done and are doing. And so continuity of government goes much further than this, right? Because, after 9/11, I remember that day so incredibly clearly. And for me, as little as I understood it as a teenager, I knew that the world had changed in some way that I couldn't even understand. And as I got older and tried to understand what happened that day, more and more questions just kept coming. And you could see there was more cover-up than actual earnest endeavors for truth and reconciliation and healing the broken hearts of just a nation and all the families and people that were affected by this. And also then comes into question, well, who did these kinds of things? And if you think I'm being too conspiratorial, remember, I'll always give you a little grain of truth in all these things. So when I say that the CIA had something to do with 9/11, you must best know that 20-something years later, we do now start to have the leaks coming out and the people beginning to, dot the I's and cross the T's, so to speak. And here, for example, is this is Aaron Mate and so this is the Grey Zone team with Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, and I'm just going to put this in the foreground, in the background here for you, just to sort of show you in this excellent expose they do. They basically go through some of the reports about bombshell filing, 9/11 hijackers were CIA recruits. And they go into the deep story about how between the CIA and the FBI, they were completely aware of the hijackers coming in, of having a background history, of going for... They even helped them get in and do their lessons for piloting. I mean, fancy that. So, that's 2023. Now we know this. And it's long enough has passed that the outrage isn't there. If we knew this a couple of days or weeks or months after 9/11, we would have turned the whole world upside down, it feels like. But I think since 9/11, we've just been nailed by op after op after op after op that we're fatigued. That was one of the points that we made in a couple of story times ago. So again, they make this really, really amazing bombshell report about how the CIA was involved in these deep events. And not only the CIA, the point is the COG, the continuity of government. The people and the politicians, government, and odds and ends who they feel should be protected while everyone else burns in nuclear hellfire. It's just mind-blowing that these guys get scuttled off into deep military underground bunkers and everyone else has to fend for themselves. And they will know long before we do about these threats. And we saw that with the RFK interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. I've got the this is the interview here. I'm not going to be able to scrub through it and find the exact spot. But sorry, this was the interview with Lex Friedman. Sorry, I said he also did a thing with Tucker, but this is actually, he mentions this in the Lex Friedman podcast, that when he was a boy and his father was obviously at the height of his political career, and obviously the height of Soviet tensions with the United States meant that nuclear war was so imminent that even the children were doing drills to hide under their desks in case of, like, you know, the sun rising twice. Oh, goodness gracious, that's a terrible thing. Anyway, but he mentions that when he was a child, you know, the marshals came in and basically said, all right, it's time to go to the bunker. Don't worry, you'll be safe. There's a McDonald's, there's movies. It's basically an underground city. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to go see it, you know. But then he got a call from his dad and said, no, don't abandon school and just disappear like that. Be a good soldier. If you don't show up for school, the other children and families will know that there is a major problem. And, you know, why must we be any better than them or less than them? He basically told his son, go to school. If there is nuclear apocalypse, you know what? It's probably better to perish in the initial bright white light than suffer the world that comes afterwards. You know, imagine telling that to like a 10-year-old and saying, go to school, be a brave soldier. Don't let the other kids know that you're afraid and we're going to be whisked away. And you know, because if you go, then what does that say about the Kennedy family name? I mean, imagine telling that to a 10-year-old. But that's an example of continuity of government there. The kids at school and the families wouldn't have known why little Bobby didn't show up. Or, you know what? You know, maybe he was just sick with a stomach bug. No, he got whisked into a bunker because he and his brother had to be kept safe from nuclear annihilation because the government chose some people and other people not, and they'd informed some people and other people not. That's the point I'm trying to make here. One of them, at least. Talking about continuity of government. And I want to start to wrap up and mention this because the real evil that lurks below the surface is when the military has these secret triggers that will come in cases of emergencies. It might sound like a great thing, but as their fake legal tentacles seem to envelop a nation like America, and I say fake legal tentacles because anything beyond the Constitution is not constitutional, in my opinion, humble opinion. But their expanded powers every year means that they have these incredibly unthinkable triggers just lurking below the surface, waiting for an emergency that nowadays they can very easily cause. So, you know, I mean, if you're not following me so much, I mean, when people talk about this, here we go. This is from the White House. This is not conspiracy or anything. This is the White House. Continuity of government. Since the days of the Cold War, the United States has had a plan in place to continue the operation of government following a catastrophic attack on the nation's capital. The 2007 National Security President Directive 51 directs the geographic dispersion of leadership, staff, and infrastructure in order to maintain and function the United States government in the event of the nation's capital being attacked by decapitation, strike by terrorists or other untoward adversaries, right? So buried deep within the 102-page National Continuity Plan is the strategy for mass evacuation, relocation, and federal government agency assistance, which includes the White House and the military, to respond to exceptional catastrophic events within the national capital region. Each agency is required to have a detailed continuity of operations plan in place. So basically every state has to fill out this very funny form. You can actually get a blank one and have a look. It's very boring. But I want to mention this, that there is a public section, very little of it that we can see through things like the National Continuity Plan and the memorandums and the laws and things like that. But there's some of it that is completely unknown to even the government, and this goes very far back. This is one of my favorite clips. I play this often because it's just gold. This is from a old congressional hearing where one senator brings up the question of what happens to the Constitution. I heard that it gets suspended when continuity of government gets kicked in. Is this not supposed to be the supreme law of the land? And this is Oliver North that asked this question. And you see this immediate scuffle and shuffle, and people are like, oh my God, like what? I can't believe he said that. Oh my God. Okay, so, they adjust the mic, they adjust their ties. And then one senator, Inouye, who's obviously read into these kinds of programs, says, yes, no, sorry, I think we need to talk about that in closed session. Here we go. So let me bring that on screen for you guys. And get some volume in there.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I love it. I love that uncomfortable scuttle in the room. Let's just watch that one more time. So this is the guy being interviewed and questioned. I love that uncomfortable scuttle in the room. It's just priceless. This is the guy being interviewed. Let's just watch that one more time.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area. So may I request that you not touch upon that, sir?
I mean, tactless. That is sensitive, therefore, it's sensitive. I can't tell you why that's sensitive. It is, and he's basically in public just telling him to shut up. Shut up and sit down.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was,
may I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, I'm certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
So I'm sure arrangements can be made in executive session. Doesn't that sound a little bit like Grush? It's like, oh, I mean, I'll be happy to give you that information behind closed doors or in a skiff. But anyways, just a loose link there. But the point I'm trying to make is that the continuity of government, this is big time stuff. The moment even a congressman just mentions it in Congress, there's suddenly like, whoa, what are you doing, guy? Like, are you being stupid? We don't talk about this openly. And then not only that, because of executive orders that are sometimes secret, there's all these triggers that we have absolutely no idea about. And so that's why I add the little spicy ending about Jan Halper and Trump talking about being still the chief in commander and how he sees this whole continuity of government and not only continuity of government, but again, this vying for the top secret spot where everything is under your control, and because of that being a military national secret, you're now protected by the shroud of the intelligence services, and whose loyalty they are under is questionable. As I said, there's a lot of schisms going on. But just going back here to continuity of government from the website of the White House, you'll see here that they also talk about the shadow government. I mean, it's literally called the shadow government. Following a catastrophic national emergency, the president or his successor can authorize the establishment of a temporary shadow government to maintain control of the essential functions of the federal government. President Bush activated the shadow government on September 11th, 2001, shortly after the second attack on the World Trade Center, Tower 2. Every federal agency has designated key individuals to be a part of an emergency relocation group. These ERGs are assigned to an alternate secure location on a rotating basis and are ready to take over the duty of supporting the national essential functions of this nation in an emergency. So there's a shadow government. There are some people that, on a rotational basis or whatever the case is, are secretly selected, not elected, selected, to run things when everyone else dies in hellfire and brimstone. That's the long and the short of it. And so you can see that that's not a very human way of thinking about the world, you know? And you know, although you'll see these kinds of articles, this is here from Foreign Policy, the American government's secret plan for surviving the end of the world. Newly declassified CIA files offer a glimpse of the playbook of the Trump administration for its the playbook that the Trump administration will reach for if it stumbles into nuclear war. So, you know, it goes through the history. I'm not going to read the whole article to you, but basically, these are the small little glimpses you get in, you know, articles. This is, by the way, Mount Weather. This is one of the parts of Mount Weather. It's absolutely massive. It's a giant mountain with a deep bunker right underneath it. So yeah, that's gonna survive quite a few nuclear strikes. And again, underneath it is a completely self-sustaining city that no one knows about, even. Well, not no one, but only a select few do, not the public. And we know these kinds of things through CIA memos that have leaked. And again, through September 11th, Peter Dale Scott also mentions that there is one of the things that these continuity of government types need in these massive attacks that they envision is a couple of things, right? So firstly, they're going to need things like a shadow government, people to, in their opinion, run the show once they survive some kind of an attack, a select few that will go forward and repopulate the earth. And they need some system of control and command. Now that command side means a communication system. And it's very interesting that Ericsson is a massive company that has got very deep ties with governments for their emergency communication systems. Not just Ericsson, many others. But they are legendary for the kinds of things that they're in the news for. Even most recently with things like Jan 6 and all kinds of other things. But anyways, emergency communications, Peter Dale Scott tells us, are often used during these emergency situations, and they are completely off the books. Nobody even knows about them. For example, when the 9/11 committee tried to find Cheney's telephone transcripts while he was, you know, moving underground through the tunnels from one place to another, there were none, because he was using a secure channel that is completely classified. So even the report for the greatest terroristic attack on the United States, even the people filing that report publicly, you know, elected officials and high-ranking people trying to get to the bottom of this were not privy to that information. And this is an article I've just put up here, which was put in the Washington Post on the 4th of June 2006, which, again, a little glimpse into, in case of a second 9/11, it's back to the bunker. Dun, 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 you know? And this is actually a very good article, to be honest. It doesn't... You see, the problem is that continuity of government is scary in and of itself. But remember that we are tying this very closely to the UFO UAP situation. Why? Because in an emergency, that's when they can, let's say, justify kicking in the triggers that then allows the military to grab control. And it's not just the US military, it's Northcom. Remember, we talked about good old Northcom, NORAD. It's all the same person, basically. It's at the moment General Van Herk, and he's might be out the door. And he might be replaced by the Biden-appointed Gillot. And these here would be essentially the people running the show in case of an attack. And if you don't believe me, again, go read these. Obviously, you know, news articles might not be the best, but there are policy papers, there are laws about this. And Peter Dale Scott also does very good work, academically speaking, writing it in a way that it can communicate and translate to the general public just how deep this rabbit hole goes and how powerful these technologies and people are. They can not only use or are supposed to use these technologies in an emergency to save us and help us and, you know, avert catastrophe, but they might also be able to instigate catastrophe because they think they might be able to survive it and claim the world for themselves at the end. That's the breakaway civilization hypothesis. And, you know, these people are nefarious. They're not your average law enforcement agencies. They're not a policeman trying to, you know, stop a criminal, you know, robbing a person. These are nefarious actors acting outside of the law. I mean, if you look at, for example, because here we really need to go into some of the history of the COG, and that's where we're going to wrap this up. Let's have a look here. So, there are, with the shadow government, many planned places for people to be dispatched and not dispatched, I guess, redirected away from catastrophe and put into what some conspiracy theorists might I say conspiracy theorists, but they've been right about pretty much everything. Is mainstream media zero, conspiracy theorists like 1,000 is kind of like the score. But some might call it internment camps, and others might just call it emergency relief camps. So, like, for example, in the United States, they got FEMA, and these FEMA things are quite scary because they come through the Homeland Security architecture, legal architecture. And what is the homeland? It's a bit of a gaseous outline. It's not clear what, you know, the homeland refers to. And again, tied to these FEMA camps that are supposed to help people, you might even just end up in case of an emergency and martial law being thrown into them from something that isn't natural, you know, whether it's a war or some kind of orchestrated false flag. We've seen this many times before, you know. So, for example, the governments all keep lists, whether it's during World War II, for example, they had the ADEX lists, and this was basically a list that the FBI did during World War II in America, which was a list of subversive people, basically, you know. So this is anyone that had a radical political opinion or was an activist fighting against the government, or, you know, immigrants that could have changed the political direction that the military chose at the time. We saw this also in Vietnam, you know, no, nothing new there. But basically they kept lists because if needed, they needed, you know, A, B, C, D, and whatever columns, or, you know, who's an enemy sympathizer and who is deemed a little bit less dangerous and who is deemed, you know, trustworthy and And then these people could be easily rounded up and, interned if necessary. We saw this with the United States and the ethnically Japanese population, whether they were American or not, were interned during Pearl Harbor. And this keeps going. They've got a lot of these readiness exercises, which also is a great topic of conspiratorial dialogue, because Rex, there's many of them. Here's one of them. Rex. Let's start. The earliest one I've got just easily available is Rex 79, I believe. Let me just check here. So every year, Rex is the readiness exercise, and every year they attach that number of the year to the Rex. So in 1979, they had Rex 79. In 85 or 86, it was Rex 85 or Rex 86. So here, for example, from the CIA archives, this is a memorandum from the United States Air Force Review relating to the exercises of Rex, and I believe this is Rex 79. I don't know why it's redacted there, because we can see it by the year. And another exercise they were doing called Global Shield. Now, the public was not informed at the time. The reason this was in the CIA archives and classified for so long is because these two things were related: Global Shield and the readiness exercises. Obviously, the military was collaborating these two events to make sure that everyone was ready at different levels, but the public was not aware that these two events were connected and so vast. And so we see here just a few things. So, for example, Rex is sponsored by the Federal Preparedness Agency, and regardless of the exercise's success or failure, a major reorganization of the U.S. civil defense community will be implemented. The other thing that they also mention here, it's actually very very fascinating. Let's see if I can spot it, because there's also the reports of what's going on in Europe, and the Strategic Air Command at the time was basically doing this Global Shield 79 public exercise to avoid. So they're basically saying to avoid speculation linking it with any aspect of the world political situation at the time, no foreign observers will be invited to the exercise. In addition, the USSR will not be notified when the exercise takes place, and plans for the SAC bombers to fly in its direction will not be obviously made public. So no nuclear weapons will be carried out, but they will obviously, and they have done exercises where they simulate nuclear attacks and things like that. Now, the other thing that they also mention here that makes these articles highly classified at the time is that they talk about how it's super important to have national coordination. And part of that is obviously the psychological operations that go with it, to not alarm the public or to not make it obvious to adversaries. You can obviously see chunks of this are still redacted, even though this was released in 2007, written in 1960 whatever. But as I mentioned, these Rex readiness exercises had a very deep link with the intelligence agencies, because the intelligence agency's job was to work on the dynamics and the optics of perception from the public, to make sure that they weren't alarmed and that enemies weren't catching on about how these things were related, and what the capabilities were, and who was friends, testing capabilities, and coordinating strategy and whatever the case is. But yeah, so I think this is it here. Global Shield added to the large-scale command post exercise Nifty Nugget 78 and Power Play Wintex 79, and could be perceived as a change in U.S. exercise strategy and readiness training. The exercise could be assessed as a demonstration of U.S. capability to quickly disperse its strategic aircraft forces and to simultaneously launch these forces under conditions of simulated missile attack. So, being like, oh look, simulated missile attack, someone's attacking us, it's not real, they look like missiles, but we can now immediately deploy our strategic aircraft forces. and launch. So, that's why the Air Force was involved in that. And these readiness exercises tie into continuity of government. These are some of the public documents that have slowly come to us as things go forward. And if you think that, okay, I'm showing you stuff from like the 60s and, Rex 85, for example, was from 1985. That was also quite a big one. Let's see if I got something about that one. Well, anyways, I was just saying that, some of these older Rex exercises were very, very interesting. For example, Rex 84 was a scenario and drill thing under the Reagan administration. And the FEMA, I think it was the deputy director at the time, under the Reagan administration with Oliver North, they were the ones that used the black ops side of the military and the intelligence agencies to not only at the time operate deep within Latin America to oppress, the communism rise and the not so friendly democracies, but they were really off the charts at the time. They were doing death squads and all kinds of things that they were supporting. And the ironic part is that the Rex 84 tie to all of this is it's involved in the Rex documentation about the anti-war activists and preemptive detention and the implications on human rights and the optics and how to spy on immigrants, and this is all when all of that should be rather illegal. And this concept of interning even citizens, American citizens, started to go quite out of the box, so to speak, because these operations, like, let me bring something a little bit more modern into the mix here. These operations have, there's nothing new about them, because even like today, here's an article from the Mail and Guardian, they're talking about Operation Jade Helm. So this is from the Mail and Guardian. This is not like InfoWars. It's Operation Jade Helm. Why conspiracy theorists fear the U.S. is invading Texas. So basically some leaked documents and, of course, the public not being aware of all of this. They came across this giant military operation that many were not aware of. And it was giant because Jade Helm, there were many of them. Again, like Rex, there's probably one every year or a couple of years. And, in Jade Helm 15, that's what was really interesting about that, and what piqued the interest of the conspiracy theorists is that firstly, many of the websites that the military put forward to the public to sort of explain what was going on, why there was like helicopters and tanks and armed personnel, and it was really like a big operation involving every branch of the U.S. military. But with these leaked documents, what we also discovered is what they were really trying to practice there was a few things. So we've discovered that Jade Helm was basically looking at how to impose martial law, take guns away from the public because some of the public were seen as combatants. So in other words, normally Jade Helm or these military readiness exercises were for what would happen if an adversary from outside the United States or continental America were to attack. But now with Jade Helm, it's like, oh well, what happens if a chunk of the country, decide to fight us? That's why the government feels they need to keep lists of people in case they need to be preemptively interned. And so, for example, that's why everyone freaked out about this, because here's one of the maps, for example. You can see here the blue states and red states and the little insurgent pockets and stuff like that. These are some of the things that were released. Now, obviously, this is the military simulating what would happen if like a part of the American population suddenly just was communist or something, and now they had to defend. But it's nuts that you would use your military application to try and subvert your own citizens, such a huge amount of them, and that you would preemptively take away their rights just at the snap of a finger of martial law. So the other interesting thing is that as Jade Helm goes forward, there is growing evidence that what they're also doing now is when they're using the full branch of all the military, all the branches of the US military, that these things are being run by computers, by AI, because there are so many working parts here that, the reason that Jade Helm is completely separate from like the readiness exercise, there's a few things, but one of the theories is that now it's all being coordinated by AI. So they give the AI a scenario, and the AI is able to track every jet, every infantry, every communication, every satellite signals emission from themselves and the enemy, and coordinate that in a split second way faster and way better than any general could. And so these exercises were to test, could the AI be applied in a state of war? So obviously one side would have generals and one side would be run by the AI, and they would have these scenarios. But what's troubling, what's super alarming and just outright mind-bendingly disconcerting is the fact that these things that they're testing, they're saying, well, at any moment we can turn this exercise into a full-scale military invasion, kind of like what Russia did with Ukraine. Oh, it's an exercise, and then the next thing, shit's gone kinetic, excuse my French. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that they were trying to violate constitutional things, martial law, taking away guns, suspending rights, and interning people, even preemptively, without, like now, you don't have habeas corpus, and you might not even have the right to a fair trial without martial law. And I'm trying to stress all of this because I really want you to get an idea of how nuts this doomsday cult of people are. Because what they think is necessary and that they are the chosen people to, entertain this future that they see, what it does is basically leave the fate of humanity to a bunch of mad people. As I said, because they think they can survive nuclear attack or whatever kind of devastational emergency, but mostly because they are able to now, at the drop of a hat with all the powerful technologies they have, create a crisis, a threat up, a real one, not just some little thing. I mean, something that will be world-changing and completely take America on its head. And you can see through things like Jade Helm, they are preparing for America to go to war with itself. And that's why the conspiracy theories are like, why do we have FEMA camps all over the place that during a time of crisis, like let's say Hurricane Katrina, these camps were empty, they were useless, people were helping each other. But when the military suddenly comes in, the camps come alive with Humvees and all kinds of things. Their use is more for continuity of government, and continuity of government is outside of the bounds of the Constitution. I don't know how to put this any better. And so all of this gets tied together with the thread of secrecy, because the UFO file and the continuity of government are the highest secrets that the United States, and again, you can apply this to any other big nation, will keep. And so this is where we're closing up with this final idea that I just want to leave you with, that, when these guys are going around shooting objects out of the sky.
This morning questions after.
Let's put some of these up on screen here so you can see here. This was earlier this year. You can see that there were about 4 objects, these balloons, remember those that were floating over continental America, and apparently they were Chinese weather balloons or something like that, spy balloons or whatever the case is. And we didn't know they were there, and okay, well, eventually we'll shoot them down. And so, eventually they shot 1 down, they shot 2 down, Then they were like, oh, we'll shoot these others down. Now we've adjusted our sensors. We can detect them now. We had a gap in our domain awareness. Such a crappy bullshit answer because, I mean, again, since Pearl Harbor, anything that flies over the continental US that hasn't got clearance, it's almost immediately shot down. And the Japanese have been sending balloons across since, as I said, Pearl Harbor. So you're telling me that they didn't already have policy and means to keep eyes on this? Like, makes no sense. But the fourth object that they shot down, you can see there, was octagonal in structure, they say. And General von Herk, he was the one when the reporter asked him, was it a UFO? And he says, well, I'm not going to rule it out. And that's where, part of the discovery of continuation of government being a part of the UFO file kind of popped out to me. I was like, what is the head of NORAD talking about? Like, oh yeah, maybe we shot down an octagonal object, and I'm not going to rule out that it was possibly a UFO, and Melissa Dalton, she was the Assistant Secretary for Homeland Defense and Atmospheric Affairs. She's a weird title. She was the one that said, we've been more closely scrutinizing our airspace at these altitudes, including enhancing our radar, which may at least partially explain the increase in objects that we're detecting. So it was 1, it was 2, it was 3, it was 4. The fourth one was octagonal, and now they can't find the debris. And now there's no video of, they promised they would tell us, and it's all mysterious. And again, who's telling us about it? Von Herk. And who's Von Herk? He's the head of NORAD and Northcom. And who's that? That is our future master. Should an emergency be declared and martial law and continuity of government kicks in, where will the American Constitution go if this happens? And especially if these people are mad and sociopathic and can create and want to create a threat up, a false flag, and then reshape the entire world with that kind of power and technology. It is an incredibly real possibility that we need to entertain. And you can leave that on by itself, just continuity of government. But the moment you start to tie in the UFO file, the technology, the UAP phenomena, the PSYOP, the secrecy that goes beyond constitutional bounds, that is when you start to really get an idea of what's going on and who's running the show. This is why I say the threat op is the love child of these two huge forces. So I hope that's a bit more clear to you, because we're not saying that this phenomenon is not real and there's not something there, but we're saying that this major PSYOP exists because the military is evil, wants to keep secrets for their apex technologies to be used as a force against people in a very negative way, usually in a deadly way. And because of the covert nature and the information world we live in, maybe they don't need to even fire a bullet. Just like the Matrix, they can trap us in some kind of different stasis, in some other kind of different subversion. Basically, if an enemy can't be subverted, then they are put down. If I can't stop you, then I stop you. So this continuation of government thing with these shoot downs of the balloons and everything, it was a complete sham. Like Trudeau was saying, I ordered the shoot down, and then it was like, no, dude, you didn't order anything. That was an American F-22 that shot it down. And then Biden was like, I ordered down and shoot down out of an F-22. No, sir, you didn't. It was NORAD that eventually took that order and just notified you, basically. And then you had your little press go ahead. So this was the zoomed in version of the balloon, one of the balloons that they shot down. And that was apparently the F-22 that shot it. And it was actually funny because on the F-22, normally they put the little stencil of whatever they shoot down, and there was this funny photo that one of the downed enemy targets was a balloon, even though claims were that it was octagonal. So let's put this all together, shall we? We have to be careful not to be caught up in CIA, intelligence, military lies. Even someone like Michael Schellenberger, he's basically a public relations guy in America who wrote like 2 articles on UFOs, and then just every person in the intelligence agency was like, oh well, I'll tell you this and I'll tell you that and I'll bring you disclosure, and he's like, wow, oh, they're so nice to me. But he's just being used as a patsy, same as Elizondo, same as Grush. But this is not to say that the phenomena is not real and worth a hard look. But at the same time that we're doing that, we also have to be careful, because the technologies that have come from this phenomena are hidden deep in the UFO file and in the continuation of government crazy doomsdayers. And they have this incredible ability to just make us believe that we're running in a normal world where the Constitution will protect us. And instead, that's just absolutely not true. Not even a little bit. Instead, we have and run the real risk and danger that these people will create an incredible hellscape for humanity and just devastate the earth. And this is why there's such huge tensions to try and bring order back to the executive branch of America. This is the one thing I'll leave us on, and I'll sign off there. This concept of continuity of government and the UAP file, you can now see the links very, very clearly. And this love child that they've got, the UFO threat, the threat op, as it were, we can see how dangerous it is. And this is only a small part of the government and the military and private contractors in government and, the military-industrial complex, the Hydra, whatever you want to call it. There's not very many of them, but they're there and they're powerful. But it's a small group. And that means that there is likely, for every action, equal and opposite reaction. A bunch of people that are, as they say, white hats. Those that are able to fight fire with fire and can see the dangers that these people are putting on not only their citizens, but on the entire human race and planet with their highly illegal activities. So what happens? Someone's going to have to come out on top. It can't go forward like this forever. And as information now and the politics and the social windfall of all of this incredible mind-bending and just explosive accounts of not only corruption with the Biden administration and possibly with Trump and disclosure of UAPs and declassified stuff that rewrites history about Israel attacking America as a false flag in America, trying to make the Bay of Pigs look like an attack of Cubans against Cubans to depose Castro. I mean, it's just psyops everywhere. And 9/11 is no different. And that's actually even well studied. And there's still many questions there. What happened to World Trade Center 6 and 7 and Building 6 and 7, sorry. So the point I'm trying to make here, or get to at least, is that it's not a straight road for these villains. It's not a straight road for anyone ever. And so you can see that every now and again there's a little wiggle in the road for them, and they're forced to backtrack and make adjustments and bring to us new psyops and things like that. But on the other end, there's the public and people like you and I that are just trying to keep a clear mind and ask reasonable questions and not just be bamboozled by, oh, the media and CNN said so and that politician said so and so, it must be true. We have to scrutinize it a bit more. What is true? What is not? How much of it is true? How did you know this? Where is the source material coming from? Because there's definitely something there. We need to know. But this is also what I want to leave you with. There is something big going on, massively big. And I'd like to bring up this slide here from this was from Greer's, Dr. Stephen Greer's disclosure project, his most recent disclosure project testimony of many of the witnesses that came forward in his group. And this is the lawyer from the group. And Greer lists these crimes that these illegal, unacknowledged special access programs and everyone involved in them are basically involved in. These are the sociopaths. This is the Hydra. These are the people that are abusing the technology and keeping it away from us elevating to a better way of living and a more peaceful way of cohabitating this planet with each other and nature. Instead, using it to subvert and change history to their own whims behind secret doors in daggering cloak situations. So you can see here that, there is just every form of illegality in the UFO or UAP file. I guess now it's called the UAP thing. And so his whistleblowers, who are very different to the ones that have come forward like Grush, it's not perfect, but they have a much different, a slightly different caliber to them, and the way that they come forward with their stories, and the evidence that they bring forward. Stephen Greer is very brave making these bold claims of what this means for humanity, where these red lines are crossed, where we as humans need to stand our ground and not have the military and big secrets decide our history for us. So this is an example of how these sociopaths in the military-industrial complex have completely suppressed humanity to their own whims and are trying to really get everything ready for a massive threat op where they can then possibly take control of everything through continuity of government and martial law. And when I say that the executive is trying to rein this back in, remember we mentioned how Eisenhower said the military-industrial complex is, if left to its own devices, will take over the United States, and it's covert. Kennedy also said mistakes are not published; they're buried. Nothing is ever said or spoken that speaks ill of the intelligence agencies. Any illegal thing will be tried but never brought to the light of day, and so that's one of the reasons that he wanted to. The JFK wanted to tear the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. So there is a very huge tug of war between some forces that want people to be free and have some kind of oversight for this continuity of government, not just some committee called, secret committee called Pegasus, which is like a handful of people trying to control a giant military hydra that will run circles around them. It makes no sense. You need to have this be a part of the public discourse openly, and that's the thing that the real people involved with the technology are afraid of the public getting involved with, And I'll leave you again with this little interesting tidbit, because again, I'm not a big, I'm just going to say this, disclaimer, I'm not a big Trump fan, I'm not a MAGA fan, I'm not even American. I'm just a spectator from afar. So when I play this clip, please don't, get too political on me. But the one thing I'm trying to point out with this clip of Jan Halper is that recently Trump has, retweeted her comments, and same with Steve Bannon. So very high-level figures have sort of given the little nod that what she's saying is something that they endorse, and that's big news, because what Trump says in this one, what Jan Halper says about Trump in this one clip, the part that interests me is the part that she says they made a big mistake trying to get Trump under criminal charges, because as that goes to the Supreme Court, he now has the powers to do the due diligence and therefore have a process of disclosure. Not disclosure, discovery, where they can legally compel investigations for information and compel people to bring forward certain things and admit evidence. And she says that Trump has, and this is the crazy thing. I don't believe a person would say this unless they have good grounds. And I've always been interested to see that it's never been a set discussion. The whole question of what is the corporation of the United States and what is the United States of America, we the people, and the United States. It's like that same thing I keep saying. What is the homeland? What geographical territory is that? When NORAD kicks in and continuity of government takes place and NORTHCOM shuts down the North American continent, what does that mean for Canadians and Americans? You got one big military that suspends both of their constitutions, and there's obviously a bigger fish swimming in these waters. And so when Trump says, we're trying to get executive control of our country back and bring it under the president, who is an elected official, because remember, even the president sometimes doesn't have access to these technologies and programs and covert operations. So he says, well, Jan Halper was interpreting the fact that Trump was going on about how he gave notice to the Vatican and to the City of London that they were going to dissolve the Corporation of America and bring the American people back under the Constitution, and not this other bunch of treaties that, are just completely made a laughingstock of, with things like the Federal Reserve, which are neither federal nor a real reserve, when they just print money like anything. It's a private company of bankers, and it runs the American the military and economy of America, and it's never been audited. That's what allows the Pentagon to lose trillions of dollars and never see a day of problem for it. And let's listen to Jan Halper, because the interesting thing she says here, and I'm just mentioning this because we need to keep an eye on it as things just as the wheels begin to come off the bus. It's it's entertaining. But she says that basically Trump met with the Pope, met with the Queen, told them we're absolving this satanic, I don't know if he used exactly the word satanic, but he just described it as like this evil sinking of the fangs and claws into the American people, or we the people, by these Illuminati style secret pacts between the old guard of the elite. And the British Crown obviously has got a long-standing relationship with the United States even to this day. In fact, you can see this very clearly, for example, in the transition of the OSS, which was the intelligence services under Churchill in World War II, and how that eventually came across the pond to America and became what we now know as the CIA. So the Office of Strategic Strategy Coordination became then embedded in the American military as an intelligence agency that we now know as CIA, NSA, etc., etc., etc. So the MI6 and the CIA are almost like completely interchangeable. Sorry, I suppose it would be MI5 and the CIA, MI6 and the NSA would be almost completely interchangeable players in a certain sense. It's interesting, food for thought. The point of the matter is that the Five Eyes allies seem to be one big group led under one big leader, as it were. And obviously that's the United States keeping all of that together. And who's running that and the head of that, it's not always very, very clear. And so when Trump says that that is something that we need to try and detach ourselves from, and how this all happened is because we don't have control of our own government, these elites, through these weird old declarations and laws and rights handed from centuries ago, Trump basically said that doesn't apply to us. Give us back our gold. We're going to go be free and independent again. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. And again, Trump's got under serious legal, political trouble at the moment. He needs to get through that before making other things. But Jan Halper, let's listen to her. She was on a British show, GBN News, Great British News, Britain's news channel, Great Britain News Channel, and this is with Stephen Dixon and his co-host. So Jan Halper here, I'm just going to play you the end bit. She's old and she's got like a very quirky face kind of thing. I just want to play you the end here where she makes the statement. Let's add a bit of volume.
Dissolving this corporation.
Just
A
jump a
lot
little
of
bit back.
money because you helped us in the Civil War. And so Tea Party and without the Vatican, he took a couple of steps, he stopped, and he waited for her to join. That was an optic to tell us that he then was going to bankrupt the U.S. corporation because it was the Vatican, the Crown, and the U.S. that was part since 1871.
Okay, let me try and explain that to you that I have no idea what this old lady is talking about here. Okay, so firstly, she's mentioned 3 places: the City of London, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. Why are these important? They're not just fancy places with obelisks, but these territories are entire nations within nations. If you look, the City of London, or known as the Queen's Square Mile, is where all the banks are. It's got its own constitution, its own prison, its own radio station. It is a country unto itself. Same with the Vatican. Vatican inside of Italy, in Rome, it even has observer status at the United Nations. I mean, I can literally, in a few hours, walk around the Vatican. It's like, it's tiny, but you can see the amount of power it has because it is even recognized by the country that surrounds it and sustains it as an independent thing. Same with Washington. Why is it called Washington, D.C.? What is that relationship with British Columbia? What is that relationship with the state of Washington? It's very fascinating that these centers of power have their own autonomy that most people aren't even aware of. So this is why she's mentioning them. She's like, these 3 centers of power are actually the capital cities. Whilst people think that, Rome is the capital of Italy and Meloni is running the show, nope. According to her, it's the Vatican, it's the Pope. They're the ones running the show. Makes sense because, the Vatican has the oldest intelligence agency. It's thousands of years old, so it's possible. Very rich, deep archives and vaults. But she's basically talking about when Trump went to go visit the Queen, went to go visit the Pope. And if you go watch those clips, you can see that at the beginning they all friendly, smiley, shake hands, and then afterwards they look very unhappy. And Trump's wife actually met the Pope dressed in a black veil. I wonder if I've got that. Because I was always having a chuckle. My family comes from Italy, and so we associate that black veil with mourning. If your husband dies, you wear a black veil. You're in mourning for your widow. You would never even have your next marriage, if I'm not mistaken, wouldn't even be in a white dress or something like that if you're being ultra traditional. Okay, no, I'm afraid I don't have that clip, but you can easily find it on YouTube. It's very interesting. So let's listen here to the end of what Jan Halper says.
And we were giving you our tax dollars. We were paying back. Forget this Tea Party and without taxation, without representation. We owed you a lot of money because you helped us in the Civil War. And so that is what Trump has now, he told the Queen, I'm ending this. We're dissolving this corporation. We're going to go back to being a republic and we'll all be separate. The Pope wasn't happy. You should find the picture of him visiting the Pope. It took 650 planes to remove our gold from the Vatican Bank.
I'm not very happy about it.
650 aeroplanes to remove the gold from the Vatican treasury and the tunnels and the crypts and wherever the hell they stash all of that, to remove the gold out of the Vatican back to the United States. Now, the only way that the Vatican would literally let that gold go would be under the fact that they couldn't not. In other words, it's a rhino's bargain. They couldn't say no. If Trump was able to threaten them with either some kind of information or, quid pro quo, something like that. I don't know. Trump could have some dirt on them. Or he could actually just literally threaten to do all kinds of things that would either expose or directly threaten the Vatican. I mean, if Trump had to fly in with, Italy's got a whole bunch of bases, American bases with nukes there. I mean, if Trump wanted to, he could threaten the Vatican with nukes in their own country, basically. I'm not saying that he would. It's a completely ridiculous concept. It's late in the evening here. I must apologize, and you must forgive me. But what I'm just trying to say here is that under the threat of force is the only way you would ever get someone like the Vatican or the United Kingdom to give you back your gold and play ball. And I say this because look at like the occupation of American forces in Syria or in any other country almost. They can't get rid of them. Japan as well. The people there voted to shut down and push out the American military bases and military personnel. But then, even though they voted, someone cited some secret military accords, and that's it. That sunk that ship for the people, even though they had a very clear voice, some greater force. Put that all down the toilet for them. And again, in many other places, Italy included, we can't get rid of the Americans because they also got their nukes there and their bases there. And look at Africa. Even though they've been ousted in many parts, we can't get the bases away. The only way you do that is sometimes physically making sure that you secure that objective. And so anyways, that's what Trump apparently did, according to Jan Helper. We will see about that. Very interesting conspiracy theory there, but I'm interested because I don't think you would make that kind of a statement and then have Trump back that statement if there wasn't some kind of truth to that. There's too many things there that you would be able to actually check, that you would actually be able to test in a certain sense. So there's something going on here. And the reason I mention this is not only because it's really interesting, as I said, in terms of this deep state battle between the corporation of America and we the people America, but there's also this COG continuity of government thing involved, because Trump, for all his faults, is at least giving off the perception that this is for constitutionality, to bring the office of the president back to the people. So even if he goes out of office, the next person that comes in isn't going to have the CIA and the military industrial complex doing whatever it wants and taking America into World War III. And I don't know if this is the crux of the whole global problem that we all face, where just conflicts keep going nuts and arms companies just keep making tons of money. But it's fascinating. We'll keep an eye on it because, as I said, not only is there that interesting thing between the constitutionality aspect of America versus the corporation and the political interests and elites of America trying to dominate not only the continent but the world, there's also this question of the UFO file and the secrecy and very deadly military aspect of this dark group that are running the show behind the scenes, behind the curtains, so to speak. As I mentioned, there's very few of these people, of these, even just if you look at statistics in just good old psychology, sociopathy is a very small percentage of the population. We're not designed to be terrible people. We work better being happy and collaborating, fulfilling ourselves spiritually, psychologically, and
to a degree physically. You know, we grow as people and as a species. So that's an important thing to keep going. And if instead you got an evil conglomerate of people that under cloak and dagger and smoke and mirror subvert our own laws and the things we're trying to build as a nation, not only in America but all over the world, then that system has to be taken down. Otherwise it will destroy us. And so that's why this comment made by Jan Halper about Trump and his perception that in some way this is what's happening, he sees it maybe a different way to what I do, but the theme is the same, that basically America needs to, and many other countries need to, try and grab back their political machinery, because all over the world it's slipping out of our hands. If you look at how many multinational corporations and institutions, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, again, look at what happened during COVID. With one voice, all these big shot places, CDC and the World Health Organization, and all these people that claim that they know and have our interests in order, and that they, the experts, told us this and that, and at the end most of it was wrong and hurt us, and that really set our children back and destroyed families. And that's the kind of stuff we need to be aware of. That was just a little drop in the ocean compared to what they're capable of. And that is why that very powerful mechanism needs to be in the hands of the people. Because if we're going to destroy ourselves, good, we destroy ourselves. But if some sociopaths are just going to, for the sake of their belief that they can live in an underground bunker for 10 generations after a nuclear strike and haha, now the whole planet is ours. I mean, again, that only a crazy person thinks like that. But we have that real danger that these are the kinds of people that we might be facing off against. So I don't know what's going on with the Jan Halper thing and Trump and America's gold and the battle against the corporation of America and we the people and all these things, but it's interesting. It's interesting to see. We'll see what comes of that. And again, I'm linking this back to continuity of government and the UFO file. I'm trying to make this very clear to most people that if you are a UFO person, great, I love you, welcome. If you are a military person, great, I love you, welcome. It's nice to have you all here. If you're a politics person, great, welcome. I don't care what subject you're from, but these things are all related. You can't just study continuity of government or 9/11 and not be like, what is this whole CIA op thing here that just goes off the charts and just straight out of the public view, but it has completely changed the way we live. We need to keep our eye on these kinds of things, because this is what these sociopaths are capable of. So let's keep our eyes peeled, keep good people around you, be kind to yourself and those that you respect and love. Wherever possible, try and leave the world a better place than the way you found it. That's the only way we can kind of combat this, as the forces kind of begin to take their place and the dominoes begin to fall. The only thing we can do is control what we can and be at peace in our hearts with whatever we choose to do with our lives. And those that are in the position to make large changes, positive changes to humanity and to the society, now's the time to really step forward. This is why we salute people who are real whistleblowers that come out at great risk to their lives and their family lives. Not like, Grush has said he's had, threats to his family and difficulty and stuff, but he's under threat from the very intelligence shadow that is creating half the problems, not only in the UFO situation, but around the world. So it's a little bit unacceptable to me. Instead, we need to, we should, if we can, keep strong and make sure that when we have truth, we get it from people who are trustworthy and not unconstitutional shysters that seek to subvert everyone so that they can have just absolute control. That's not the future that we want for humanity. So I'm going to end off here. I'm going to end off with this reminder to everyone that you can't study these different aspects without knowing at least a little bit one of the other. Again, if you're not big in the whole UFO ET thing, fine. Think of it as just advanced technology. It doesn't have to be off-world. It can just be a breakthrough technology. But it will be hidden by the intelligence services, and it will be used as a weapon of war, and it will be protected at every cost, even beyond the limits of the Constitution. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a wild ride, and this one definitely has been, and I thank you all so much for joining me. I'm sorry we didn't have this story time on time yesterday, Sunday. That's normally when we try and broadcast, but if it's not Sunday, it's definitely going to be Monday, and the video uploads definitely come through on the Monday. So you can catch this rerun if you missed a bit, bits or pieces, or you want to follow up on some information or pause the video in some parts. You can do that. We upload all of this on YouTube for now, at the Prime Matter Podcast on YouTube. You can also drop us an email or leave us some comments. Our email address is theprimematterpodcast@gmail.com. Again, comments, thoughts, anything, always welcome. It's always a beautiful thing to share this dialogue and this incredible mystery with all of you. So let us know what you think. What's going on in your life? What's deep in your thoughts regarding these really important subjects? So, have a great week further. We'll see you for Storytime 23 next week. And just much love and light from good old South Africa and myself, Euphoria. Signing out, and yeah, see you at the flip side. Catch you at the next one. Peace out.